the laziest Kryptonian in the Marvel Universe. Hey, fanfic family. So glad to see you here again to continue this incredible adventure. As always, kindly remember, this story is 100% fiction, so don't go looking for dimensional portals in your closet. All rights to this fantastic novel belong to the original author. We're just your humble narrators of epic tales. Are you enjoying the fanfic? Show it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and dropping us a like. And if you're impatient for more exclusive content, our Patreon is your happy place. Chapter 76 Counterattack. As the attacking gunfire ceased, and the unmistakable sound of reloading magazines could be heard, Tony Stark, like a god of war, scurried out from the side of the cabinet. He simultaneously held his gun with one hand and fired repeatedly at the gunman who had entered the villa. Although he wanted to continue playing dead, the man had rushed out with the aura of a leading superhero, so Henry couldn't hide any longer. A favor from someone who had shared life and death together was still a favor, and it wasn't often that he could owe a favor to someone of that caliber. Besides, if Tony failed here, who knew if old Stark would explode and eliminate everyone involved in the villa today? The rich and powerful might be able to save his life, but those like him, powerless and without, would have to rely on their superpowers to survive. It took only a moment to weigh the pros and cons, and Henry stood up from behind the cabinet just as Tony rushed out. Every time the Stark young master fired a shot, Henry watched to see if Tony's muzzle would hit the target. If he could hit someone, he'd shoot them. If he couldn't, he'd just shoot again. It sounded magical, but with the speed of a Kryptonian's nerves and thoughts, such a feat was a piece of cake. Henry's body was like a regulator. The more focused his attention, the faster his reaction time. Not only could he think more, but he could also function normally within this realm. Relatively speaking, to outsiders, Henry seemed to have entered some kind of super speed realm. To him, the world seemed to have come to a near standstill. In his past, as a stuntman and action actor, this ability had allowed him to safely perform many maneuvers that others considered difficult. So this wasn't just a last-minute effort. Now, when using this ability to shoot, hitting without missing a single shot was essential. Hitting him was impossible, even for the most skilled marksman. In fact, Henry wasn't incapable of using his super speed to blow someone's head off with a single punch, then withstanding the bullet. But he didn't want to expose his superpowers. Cheating with his reaction speed made him invincible. They say one should be low-key. Of course, Henry couldn't and didn't need to use all his superpowers against these non-threatening ordinary people. And to conceal his super-fast reflexes, he relied on his acting skills. This was a true Superman skill. The difference between Superman and Clark Kent wasn't just a suit and a pair of glasses. Reporter Clark Kent's personality was clumsiness. Most people who knew both Superman and Clark Kent found it hard to imagine the bumbling reporter transforming into a godlike Superman after donning a suit. If Superman's human form weren't a reporter but an actor, he'd be a movie star. Henry had a deep understanding of this. In actual action, for every shot Tony Stark fired, Henry would slowly follow with one or two shots. He would then deliberately miss his own pistol, and then, together with Tony, he defeated all the gunmen entering the villa through the main entrance. While not every shot was lethal, the fact that two men, armed with two pistols, managed to take down 6 enemies was considered exceptional by most people. Tony Stark seemed to believe he'd taken down all the enemies himself, one shot at a time, so he glanced defiantly in Henry's direction. To be fair, Master Stark's pistol accuracy was quite high. At a range of about 10 meters. He'd hit 4 out of 6, 2 of which were fatal. He had reason to be proud. Henry, flicking his holster open, gave the now empty gun a look. He then went forward to check on the fallen gunmen. He wasn't quite so thorough, shooting each one individually. But at least he had to disarm them to prevent them from surviving and shooting them in the back. Henry also fiddled with a pistol. Tony, approaching, observed Henry's clumsy movements, his face furrowed with frustration as he asked, "What are you doing?" "I'm trying to figure out how to remove the magazine and check the remaining ammunition." Tony pointed to the latch on the gun's grip and said, "Press here, and the magazine will pop out." Henry pressed the latch as instructed, and the magazine ejected. But his other hand wasn't positioned under the grip to receive the magazine. So, that round had him scrambling to grab the magazine. Luckily, he didn't drop it. Even putting it back in, he had to push it twice before it clicked into place. The same went for loading the holster. After completing the entire process, Henry finally assumed the gun-holding stance. Tony Stark, watching with a scowl and a roll of his eyes, reluctantly reminded him, "Your safety isn't on." "Oh," Henry said, glancing around before confirming it was in place. As for the on-off switch, there was an engraving on the gun, so there was no need to ask again. Unable to resist, Tony Stark finally asked, "Have you ever used a gun?" Henry hesitated briefly before saying, "Today's my first time." This was the honest truth. Given his experiences before the time travel, Henry had only seen guns on TV and in movies. Today was his first time handling a real one. Even in Alaska, Henry hadn't played with John's shotgun. However, Henry's blunt honesty left Tony Stark with a dark look, and he turned his back on the seemingly unreliable comrade. If the other party hadn't been able to distract the enemy, he really wouldn't have wanted to follow him. Tony Stark grabbed a pistol and tucked it into his waistband. He then took a rifle, not forgetting to remove the magazine and weigh it to ensure it had enough ammunition. As for the rifle, he didn't let Henry take one. These captured rifles were all new, relatively complex in structure and operation. Furthermore, rifles were not suitable for indoor use. To avoid being shot on the back, unreliable comrades were better off with pistols. Those who fell to the ground, still breathing and groaning, were kissed by Tony Stark with the butt of his rifle, effectively knocking them unconscious. Seeing Tony Stark's restless movements, looking around and listening for gunshots from elsewhere, he knew this man wasn't going to just stand there and wait for help. Henry said, "Their target is not you, but that man named Josh Hilton. Do you still want to fight them? Didn't you say that the support will come in 20 minutes? How can you be sure that they won't kill everyone here to silence them? If we don't fight back in the chaos, we will become lambs to be slaughtered after they suppress the situation. With the equipment of these people, I doubt that others can even last 20 minutes. Tony glanced at Henry, and said, "If you are afraid, you don't have to follow." The Kryptonian was speechless. Chapter 77, The Qualities of a Hero. A defining characteristic of a superhero is the courage to stand up. This is why, despite his Kryptonian powers, Henry doesn't believe he can become the next Superman. When faced with a problem, his first priority is to protect himself. Even though nearly 20 years after his time travel seemed like a blank, spent either in captivity or tortured, he had lived for 30 or 40 years before the time travel, and the youthful spirit of youth had long since faded. Yet, Tony Stark is worthy of being a future superhero. While many may view him as a hero hiding behind the Iron Man suit, they fail to realize that he was born surrounded by enemies, forging his first, rudimentary suit to protect himself. Even with his Mark 42 still charging, he still dared to single-handedly charge into enemy territory, armed with weapons he'd cobbled together from a hardware store, and pursue the culprit. The Iron Man suit was merely a reflection of his wealth. Even without it, he was no less courageous. But to be honest, Henry felt that this teenage Tony Stark possessed only the recklessness of a newborn calf, fearless of a tiger. As if desperate to prove something, they readily disregarded life and death. As this man ran toward the intensified gunfire again, Henry seriously considered whether a shot in the foot might quiet him down. But in the end, Henry followed, securing Tony's retreat. The Kryptonian senses were now fully activated, like a human radar penetrating walls, zeroing in on any suspected enemy. This action made Henry detect a sense of disharmony in the enemy's tactics. They had a purpose, and their target was undoubtedly the banquet. But with so many people attacking, there was no central command center. Despite the tactical coordination, it seemed more improvisational. This proved that the encirclement was imperfect. With the right direction and a quick run, there was still a chance of escape. Their search inside the house was merely a matter of avoiding interference, and there were always some unintentional omissions. This reminded Henry of the gold coin he had found on the fallen gunman while searching for a replacement pistol. He had seen the same gold coin before, from Tom, the human resources agent in Alaska. When he found it, he pocketed it as trophy. Henry wasn't sure Tony noticed. Perhaps a mere gold coin wasn't much considering his wealth. Besides, it was found on the gunman, so Tony didn't think much of it. Looking back now, the existence of assassin organizations in a high-risk world like the Marvel Universe doesn't seem so strange. And the fact that this assassin organization has a world-class scale and system seems normal. Take, for example, the Continental Hotel, which uses gold coins as bargaining chips. A unique feature of the Continental Hotel's bounty system is that it doesn't prohibit multiple assassins from hunting the same target. Whoever can provide proof of a kill receives the entire reward. Therefore, Assassins can cooperate and split the bounty, or they can rob each other, pocket the proceeds, or even steal the heads, all of which is permitted under the rules. However, once inside the Continental Hotel, assassins are strictly prohibited from killing each other. Normally, targets that are too difficult or have too low a reward don't attract many assassins. But in today's situation, if the Continental Hotel's assassin organization is truly behind this, then the bounty on their target is high, attracting so many people. If this speculation is true, then the only consolation is that the Continental Hotel's assassins are of varying quality. Not everyone possesses the skills of Baba Yaga, or John Wick. Take, for example, the two gunmen we encountered in the lobby. Even within arm's reach, they dared to casually move their guns away. It was almost as if they were asking someone to resist quickly. A seasoned assassin would never do such a foolish thing. And the same thing happened to the 6 men just taken down. They were firing rifles, yet they emptied their magazines in roughly the same amount of time, reloading simultaneously, giving Tony Stark an opening to dash out. Perhaps these men possessed the courage to kill. With a bit more experience, they wouldn't have been so easily taken down by a reckless young man like Tony Stark. Henry hoped the next enemy would be just as easy to deal with, thought Henry, as he fired a shot into the window of a nearby, unlit room. Walter, Tony immediately took cover against the wall and asked, looking back. Well, I just saw a shadow, so I shot. But nothing happened. Maybe I was mistaken, Henry said. In reality, a hapless person had just climbed out a window when Henry shot him in the handhold, sending him plummeting. Well, his heart was still beating, so he wasn't dead. Tony said disgruntledly, be careful, don't expose us. Yes, sir. Tony Stark, who had just turned around, took 2 steps forward when he passed a doorway. Henry grabbed him by the back of his collar and yanked him back. Simultaneously, a barrage of bullets blazed in from the doorway. Tony Stark was nearly riddled with bullets. Henry didn't explain, but his pull pulled both him and Tony to the ground. Simultaneously, the barrage of bullets extended to the wall they had been leaning against, piercing the wooden partitions. They fell to the ground, having escaped death. Tony rolled aside, no longer pressing on Henry. What's this room? He asked. Smoking room? Smoking room? Why does it smell wrong? You know, those strong, addictive cigarettes. Tony understood, but didn't criticize. Instead, he quickly turned his head and feet so that he lay on the ground and said to Henry, push me out. Henry understood what he meant and grabbed Tony Stark's shins with both hands and pushed him forward. Tony appeared from under the doorway, rifle in hand, and fired a burst of fire at the armed men inside. The sound of the gunfire suddenly stopped. Just as Tony Stark was about to stand, Henry slipped in and fired 2 more shots at the gunmen who had just jumped out from the cover of the sofa. The first shot had actually knocked him down, the second was just a show. Tony, who had fallen from his prone position, saw this. Although he didn't say thank you, at least he didn't continue his vicious attacks. Tony stood up and walked around the room, finding that the occupants were either completely stoned or shot in the head, never to be conscious again. However, the sound of gunfire elsewhere didn't keep Tony from wasting much time in the room. He darted out, heading in the direction of the gunfire. Henry, following behind, could only sigh, is this the difference between a nobody and a hero? Chapter 78. Who is the target? Tony Stark, a formidable gunslinger, charged forward with standard tactical maneuvers. Seeing anyone with a gun, he'd fire a barrage, seemingly hitting the target with every shot. In reality, it was Henry who was providing backup. Whenever Tony's rifle emptied, he'd fire a shot, sending these gunmen, who weren't sure if they were from the Continental Hotel, on their way. It didn't appear they were killing anyone. Most of the guests and receptionists at the banquet were simply herded into the corners of the room like quails. The gunshots heard earlier were mostly warning shots. Only a few, perhaps those high on drugs, would resist and be shot, only to then quiet down. In comparison, Tony and Henry were the ruthless duo. Anyone shot by Henry, with timely assistance, had a chance of survival and no concerns about injury. Tony's marksmanship, however, was erratic. Some fell to the ground after being shot in the head, while others, still breathing, remained. Fortunately, Tony Stark wasn't in the habit of reloading, so he rushed to avert the threat at the banquet as quickly as possible. The two of them finally cleared the villa's first floor. Tony also reminded those still alive that Stark Industries security would arrive shortly, and that everyone should remain where they were and find cover. Of course, Some brave individuals snatched up the gunmen's weapons and fled, either alone or with others. They all sought to escape the villa as quickly as possible to avoid further involvement in the shootout. Just as Henry couldn't stop Tony's actions, Tony Stark couldn't command this crowd of strangers. After all, everyone was solely responsible for their own lives. It could be said that the Stark young master wasn't yet capable of acting as a leader in this era. Who would stay on the battlefield if they could escape? Continuing to clear the second floor or venturing into the troubled open area by the pool wasn't an option. Tony had already hidden himself by the large floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at the scene. Outside the French windows, two groups of men were controlling everyone by the pool from the front and back. The girls, who had been in the pool on the inflatable mattresses, were also forced out to the poolside. Invited guests, as well as the hostesses and playgirls sent by the banquet company, were now huddled together. One of the gunmen was interrogating them fiercely, even threatening them with guns. Tony, having discarded his emptied rifle and switched to pistol, asked Henry, "Do you think you can handle one of them?" Henry unloaded his magazine, glanced at it, and then reloaded it. "I only have 2 bullets left," he said. A single word spoke louder than 1,000. Tony had given up hope on Henry. He was still trying to figure out how to deal with the gunmen without harming the hostages. Before he could figure it out, perhaps the earlier conversation or the sound of Henry unloading and reloading his magazines caught the attention of the gunmen by the pool. One group moved toward the villa and fired indiscriminately at the French windows. At the same time, a third group of gunmen entered the pool area. The situation took a sudden turn for the worse. Tony Stark, undeterred by the recoil, rushed out of the shattered French window, firing back at the group of gunmen. The sudden appearance of 2 men startled the gunmen near the pool. The group of gunmen, in particular, split to the left and right, shooting and seeking cover. 2 other groups of gunmen, further away, also opened fire. Tony, running, shot one of them, while Henry dispatched the remaining 2. Without stopping, the 2 men scrambled to hide behind a low flower bed. The flower bed they were leaning against was now crackling with fire from 2 guns. Both the future Iron Man and the Kryptonian had to hunker down as much as possible to hide behind the small flower bed. Of course, one of them was there to cause trouble. So, Henry deliberately took a more distant position to ensure the young Stark wouldn't scream in pain from being shot. Tony unloaded the magazine and saw it was empty, leaving him with only the last round in the chamber. He asked, "Do you have any more bullets?" Henry displayed his unholstered pistol without saying anything. Tony cursed, "Fuck." The gunmen on the other side also stopped firing. With police car sirens blaring in the distance, the gunmen had little time to evacuate. The gunmen were equally anxious. One yelled, "Damn it! Has anyone even found the target?" The same group, once again threatening the captives with guns, shouted, "Where the hell is Josh Hilton? Has anyone seen him? Don't think those 2 guys can save you. They're in trouble too, you know? Maybe I don't need so many people here. Just one person who can speak up will do." The new gunman, with a resigned tone, said, "Don't any of you recognize the target? Fuck you. If they knew, they wouldn't be asking for so much." The man who was cursing suddenly fired a shot. It was not known if he hit anyone, but the detained people screamed in fear. The new group persuaded, "Okay, don't scare them. At least this group of people is loyal, which is commendable." "What the hell are you talking about?" Another gunshot rang out, this time accompanied by the screams of a pig being slaughtered. The shooter was one of the new gunmen. The leader said, "Josh Hilton, you have a group of good friends. But obviously, that's not enough." "Why?" Henry, hiding behind the flower bed, recognized the voice of the fat man. It really sounded like the sound of a pig being slaughtered. The gunman said, "Oh, you're lucky. Because the employer has a special request, saying that before killing you, you must know why. You want to kill me too. You don't think that all of us came here just to cut another hole in your ass, do you? Have mercy on me, I beg you, have mercy on me." "It's no use begging me for mercy, because you've said too many things you shouldn't have said, and too many people have known about them. The employer doesn't like things to get out of control when he can't see them, and you should know that. I was wrong, and I won't say it again. Please forgive me this time. You're begging for mercy from the wrong person, Mr. Hilton. We are only responsible for killing you, not for forgiving you. Take my advice, go and confess to God." "Wait a minute," Tony shouted, and just as he was about to stand up, Henry pulled him down again. At this time, 2 bullets were fired over the 2 men's heads. And it was obvious that this group of people had been waiting for the two heroes to show up. The third gunshot that followed stopped the fat man's screams. Chapter 79. The American police arrived late. Effective suppressive fire and swift action. All signs proved that the third group entering the area was far less experienced than the rookie shooters they had encountered previously. Tony tried to stop them, but hiding behind the flower bed, he was clearly being pinned down by the constant barrage of bullets. If Henry hadn't pulled back just now, he would have been shot at least once. The leader of the shooting said, "The target has been taken, we have to evacuate. If we delay any longer, the police will be here." "You don't want to deal with the LAPD, do you?" a panicked gunman said. "Then what about the witnesses here? Make them shut up forever, come on." The employer chose this kind of occasion to make an example of him and warn others. "You killed everyone, who did you warn? And you also know the difficulty of this bounty. If any of the young men here dies, we will be on the bounty list tomorrow. If you kill everyone here, we may not even survive tomorrow. Mad fact, are we leaving like this? Don't worry. These young men are smart enough. They know what to say and what not to say. Even if they don't understand it themselves, there must be someone in their family who understands it. If you want to stay and continue to worry about this kind of thing, then I'll excuse you. I have to leave first." "What about the proof of kill? Let me tell you, my people will get half of it. I controlled these people. We also have a contribution. Our employer will know we've succeeded when they see the news. If you want to split up, your people need to make it back to the hotel alive. Until then, it's not me you need to be wary of, but the people coming over now." The police car sirens suddenly stopped, confirming they had reached their destination. The two groups of gunmen fired 3 rapid bursts into the air, as if to notify the others. The one who started the attack shouted toward the flower bed, "Two heroes in hiding, we're leaving. As long as you don't jump out to stop us, we can live in peace." "Okay, this damn house." Tony started to stand again, but Henry pulled him down as well. 2 more familiar shots whizzed overhead. "Madfuck," Tony cursed. Tony Stark, well aware of his own bulletproof nature, this time took cover behind the flower bed. That was until a group of people arrived, shouting, "LAPD, drop your weapons. Hands up." Henry had already thrown away his empty gun and raised his hands high. Tony's approach was straightforward. He also dropped his gun, half-raised his hands, and said, "I'm Tony Stark. I'm also a victim. I won't say anything until a lawyer is here." With a wealthy young man standing in his way, Henry barely suffered any consequences. He simply couldn't leave until a Stark Industries lawyer arrived. Besides police cars, ambulances and FBI personnel arrived shortly afterward. But the largest group of people were Stark Industries security personnel, who simply lacked law enforcement powers. After all, the individuals involved in this case were of significant status. And it's hard to say whether they were perpetrators or victims, and which presented a greater challenge to the officers. Even the worldly wise LAPD officers were at a loss when they saw this. For the police, simply wealthy individuals and celebrities are not on the same level. The latter aren't necessarily wealthy, and even if they are, they worry about their reputations being damaged, while the former don't have as many concerns. Celebrities, it seems, have far more vulnerabilities than simply wealthy individuals. When celebrities gather for a party, even if there's blasphemy, gunfire, or even fatalities, a dedicated public relations firm will step in to whitewash the situation and rebrand the incident. If a singer gets into trouble, they might release a commemorative album or hold a commemorative concert. If a movie star gets into trouble, classic films might be released back in theaters. Regardless of the star's status, merchandise sales are bound to surge. It's fair to say that the death of a celebrity presents business opportunities everywhere, even if they're limited to a single wave. Even if the celebrity's reputation falls apart, the freed-up resources can be repurposed. Even previous investments can be recovered or resold in countless ways. The only losses are the merchandise itself. So, when a celebrity gets into trouble, aside from the disappointment of their fans, the commercial value is a revelation. The police need only cooperate, they're a minor player. But today, the victims are a group of wealthy young men, and the situation is completely different for the police. Should they be dealt with severely or let off lightly? Without clarifying the identities of the victims and the perpetrators, the police can't make a definitive judgment. Worse still, sometimes verifying identities is taboo. So when the FBI showed up, the LAPD chief happily handed the burden off to them. Even with the elevated level of responsibility, the Stark young master faced less trouble. FBI agents were more adept at handling matters at their level, while the junior officers were, by contrast, overwhelmed. So, Henry and Tony, protected by Stark Industries security, sat at the rear door of an ambulance, examining possible injuries. A large, dark-skinned paramedic worked on their bodies. They watched, like a spectacle, as the police and FBI rushed in and out, while other paramedics worked on the injured. Those confirmed dead were left where they were, waiting for the on-site evidence collection team to finish before their bodies were moved. No police came to question Tony. The young master had made it clear he was waiting for his lawyer to arrive, so the police certainly didn't want to be in vain. They primarily questioned the banquet company's personnel, who didn't have the luxury of hiring lawyers. At least they needed to clarify the circumstances and identify the individuals involved. Compared to Tony Stark, who appeared composed and unfazed by the police and FBI agents bustling about, Henry looked a complete mess. Most importantly, he was soaking wet as he ran around after Tony. Although he managed to shake off a lot of the water, his clothes were still wrinkled and utterly awful. Tony Stark, observing the mess of his temporary comrade, suddenly asked, "Why are you helping me? Why would I help you?" Henry was bewildered, not understanding the point of the question. Tony said, "Look, most people we rescued would run if they had the chance. You didn't play much of a role, but you stuck around until the end. This is, after all, our third encounter, not much of a role. Cowgoo, you eat my Kryptonian cunt. You bastard. Without me backing you up, you'd have to get a few more holes in your body. Don't you have any idea?" Without waiting for Henry's face to change slightly to answer, Tony asked again, "By the way, shouldn't you still be filming a movie? I remember that filming hasn't finished yet." Chapter 80. Another invitation. Henry, now blunt and embarrassed, said, "The producer fired me to avoid another conflict with you, so, do you want me to help you get your job back?" Tony asked bluntly. He added, "Or find you another job?" "First up, I didn't ask for anything like that, I know, but there's no need for that." Henry shook his head. "It's all just a matter of discretion. Even if you didn't say anything, those people would have done the same thing anyway. By the same token, I helped you today. As long as you don't explicitly ask everyone to target me, those people will know what to do. Even if they don't specifically give me the opportunity, at least they won't hinder me." "That's enough. Is that enough? Is that all you're helping me for?" Tony asked. Henry scoffed. "Mr. Stark, please use that brilliant mind of yours. It might not have been clear at first, but looking back now, are we really in danger?" The killer's target was clear, that fat guy, Josh Hilton. As long as the others cooperated and didn't resist, they wouldn't have suffered a single injury. Perhaps you could say you intervened to save someone. But in the end, they succeeded, and you didn't save the fat guy, right? In the end, your intervention only resulted in you wounding a few people, perhaps even killing them. Is that what you wanted? Tired of shooting dead targets, and of course, the chance to shoot a live one was a chance you couldn't pass up. Is that right? So, my initial assistance to you was actually risk-free. You felt the danger of life and death throughout the entire process, and it was all self-inflicted. Well, you were the one who led the charge, and I didn't expect you to help me with my work at all, because the goal was to keep you alive and avoid being implicated. Have you ever considered the impact it would have had if you'd been shot on there?" Tony said unhappily. "How could we have known this would be the outcome? Could you have guaranteed, from the outset, that these killers wouldn't harm innocent people?" Henry shook his head honestly. Tony continued, "If things don't work out, someone has to step up, rather than letting the bad guys have their way. So, why can't that person be me? As for influence, do I have any influence?" Tisk, the eldest son of the Stark family, Henry scoffed. "It's like humans on Earth, accustomed to breathing air, never considering it a special privilege. So, discussing whether air is a privilege with Earthlings feels foolish. Similarly, discussing such an issue with this young man only highlights how poor one truly is. Not just in terms of wallet, but in every aspect." The moment he understood, Henry felt the point was lost. Sure enough, he should stay away from these protagonists, lest they be cursed by their doomed fate. Even if Iron Man isn't doomed, he's a black hole that attracts trouble, or a personality that actively creates it. He should be steered clear. Standing up, Henry looked around, hoping to find a police officer or FBI agent to take his statement. "Finish it early, go home and rest. I don't want to sit around this troublemaker." Seeing this, Tony asked, "What are you going to do? Find someone to turn themselves in? Kill them or cut them up? You're with me. Why don't you wait for my lawyer to come? I can defend myself. The law is all in those books anyway." A quick glance will be enough. It was a very cliched statement, but Tony Stark didn't see anything wrong with it. Because that was how he understood the law. He had only handed it over to the lawyer because he was too lazy to read it. What annoyed him was that the man looked like he was avoiding the plague, desperate to get away from him. Fortunately, geniuses usually have good memories. There are many things that they just don't take to heart, but when they need to be used, Tony Stark still remembers them. "If I invite you to another party, would you go?" "No, I think I'm allergic to rich people's parties. If I go to one of those too many times, I'm afraid I'll lose my life. Anyway, I want to ask, do you really have no Russian blood? What you do makes it seem like you drank a bottle of vodka before you came here, and you're just about to say hurrah." Henry walked away. Faced with Henry's teasing, Tony was unusually calm. He simply said, "The party I'm talking about isn't some messed up thing like this. It's a simple dinner and chat, hosted by one of my elders, that has even less to do with me. What can I do at a gathering of you rich people? Show off? Or serve as an example of poverty to broaden your horizons?" Henry walked away. Tony made an exaggerated expression of regret and said, "What a pity. Not everyone can attend Ms. Hepburn's party. Come to think of it, why would I take you there? You don't know anyone and we can't get along." Henry walked back silently and said respectfully, "Mr. Stark, I think there is some small misunderstanding between us. If it has caused you any unhappiness, please accept my sincere apology here. Your lawyer will be here soon, right? I can tell you the whole story on your behalf, and you just need to add to it, so you don't have to waste too much time. Of course, I will focus on your heroic deeds and your great sentiments. As the heir to Stark Industries, you risked your life to save so many people. Young people all over the United States should learn from you. Yes, this is Hollywood. Perhaps it would be a good idea to put such deeds on the big screen, so that everyone can know about your unbeatable marksmanship and fearless courage. If you think killing too many people isn't good for your image, how about this? I was the one who fired the shots. Your genius made the best judgments, saving me time and again. Without your guidance, I would have been killed by the assassin's gun long ago." Henry unleashed a flurry of attacks, leaving Tony Stark stunned. He endured the discomfort and looked at the man in front of him with a horrified expression. "Well, is that too much?" Henry asked with a flattering smile. "This isn't just too much, is it?" Tony took a few steps away from the Kryptonian who had changed his face and said, "Are you schizophrenic? Which personality are you in now, Mr. Stark? There's only me, your most loyal friend. If you think I'm unworthy, then I'm your most loyal servant." Henry almost rushed forward to hug his thigh. Tony cursed, "Damn it, talk to me normally. Also, don't call me Mr. Stark, it reminds me of another old guy. Call me Tony, and I might consider taking you to Ms. Hepburn's party. Thanks to book friends 20230412234352164 and Xiao Zhangshan for the reward." Chapter 81 Banquet. Following Tony Stark, who was wearing a custom-made suit, but without a tie or bow tie, with the first button left open, Henry was glad he'd given up on the soaked suit he'd bought and rented a new one instead. Although his current fashion sense made it difficult to tell the difference between a custom-made suit and a cheap one, he managed to avoid being rude. He held a bouquet of yellow roses and lilies. This was standard etiquette for first visits in the United States, and one could also bring a small gift or a bottle of wine. Considering the other person's wealth, he probably couldn't afford a gift or wine that would be appreciated, so Henry brought the flowers. In fact, from the moment Henry appeared with the flowers, Tony Stark had been laughing, a rather obscene smile. It made the Kryptonian's fist itch, and he wanted to punch the future Iron Man in the face. Henry suppressed his impulse with great willpower, then used 120% of his best acting skills to control his facial muscles and put on a kind and friendly smile. The laughter sent chills down Mr. Stark's spine. The family dinner was held at the Stark family's Beverly Hills villa. Tony didn't live there, so they came from somewhere else. On the way, Henry nervously asked Tony, "Why is Ms. Hepburn staying at your villa?" "Like I said, she's retired now and lives in Connecticut. When she comes to Los Angeles, she mostly stays in hotels. But for some old friends gatherings, they always need a venue, so they use our villa. Sometimes she even stays there, so Your family has a close relationship with Ms. Hepburn, Henry pondered, then a look of sudden realization crossed his face. Oh, that's not possible. Shut up, I think you're thinking something very rude. If you're going to say anything you shouldn't, get out of here. Tony Stark had no desire to discuss the romantic affairs of the older generation. As for Henry, he wondered if this Howard Stark lived such a wild life. Had he ever failed to impress any girl from the Golden Age? The Stark family's Beverly Hills mansion was every bit as impressive as the one Henry had seen before, rented by a banquet company. It was just a bit more old-fashioned, like a manor from the last century. This tacky style was a mystery. As they passed the Iron Gate, Tony Stark rolled down his car window and simply said into the intercom, "It's me." That was a real eye-opener for Henry, and the gate to the courtyard swung open. The flashy red Ferrari revved into the courtyard. Honestly, Henry believed that so-called sports cars were vehicles that ignored comfort. He'd rather ride in that old Kryptonian Cadillac he bought in Alaska than in this thing. But right now, Henry didn't have time to worry about bumping into people. His mind was consumed by the nervousness of meeting his idol, and he couldn't think of anything else. Even after exiting the car, Henry immediately used his free hand to smooth out the wrinkles on his cheap suit. "I'm here," a distinct female voice boomed from behind the villa's main entrance, sending Henry's heart racing. As the door opened, Henry lowered his head and handed the bouquet to her. He then said, "Hello, Ms. Hepburn. I'm a huge fan." "Oh, really?" The woman's voice was different than he'd expected, sharp and crisp, unlike the soft, slightly deeper voice he'd imagined. After the celebrity took the flowers, Henry finally looked up. What caught his eye was a face of a fading beauty, with deep features and a sharp gaze. "Oh, it's Ms. Hepburn." The frustration in her voice was palpable. Katharine Hepburn immediately glared at him and said sternly, "You can make your expression of disappointment even more exaggerated, and I promise I won't break your nose." Henry, realizing his mistake, quickly retorted, "Oh, Ms. Hepburn, please forgive my impoliteness. I'm a fan, too, whether it's Morning Glory, for which you won the Oscar for Best Actress, or the masterpieces Bringing Up Baby and The New Bitch, they're all my favorites. Even later works like The African Queen, Summer's Devil, and Dinner Are You, are all deeply memorable and leave a lasting impression. Your performances in these films prove that you're not just beautiful, but also a truly exceptional actress with exceptional acting skills." Katharine peeked from behind the bouquet at the son of an acquaintance standing behind Henry and said, "Tony, tell me about your friend who's so quick to change his words." "Katharine, he's just a small-time Hollywood actor." The voice was clearly incredulous. "He's a bit of a smartass." The voice rose slightly. If a Stark man could be praised for his cleverness, then he was definitely not just any smart guy. "Remember that big shooting a while ago? He was the one who fought off those killers with me." Katharine raised an eyebrow, looking at the strange young man again. Henry patted his chest and nodded, saying, "Henry Brown, it's an honor to meet you, Ms. Hepburn. Call me Katharine, kid. Otherwise, it's easy to associate you with another Ms. Hepburn," the fading star teased. "Come in, Tony, this is your house." "No," Tony Stark said, "this is the house the old man bought. It has nothing to do with me." "HMPH, a Stark man," Katharine scoffed, making way for the door. Henry wasn't so pretentious, but entered the house and blocked the door that automatically closed for Katharine. The fading star gave up his position blocking the door and said, "If little Tony doesn't want to come in, let him stand outside as punishment." "Come with me, kid." Coming, Henry followed happily, leaving the arrogant young master behind. "Damn it, Katharine, you and I are friends, right? Have you ever seen a friend's obligations include coaxing children?" Katharine Hepburn mercilessly delivered a final blow, beating the eldest son of the Stark family like a grandson. Tony opened the half-closed door himself, walked in and continued, "Even the chefs for today were called by me. You can send them back. It's just a good opportunity for me to show off my cooking skills." Katharine was not one to indulge her child and continued to stab the knife. Henry praised from the side, "I have some experience in cooking too. I can help out." "Oh, that's great. It seems that we now know who is the most useless person between us." If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 82, Big Talk. In the end, no one cooked, leaving the meal to a professional French chef team. And since it was a banquet, the attendees couldn't just be Henry, Tony, and Catherine. There was also a couple from the financial world, Alex Hart, the CEO of MasterCard, and his wife. Perhaps because of Henry's presence, Alex, the financial tycoon, didn't dominate the conversation. Instead, he fulfilled his role as a listener, offering appropriate responses. Tony Stark, always fond of the spotlight, was utterly defeated by Henry. Henry could rattle off Catherine's films, even including positive reviews from the time. He could even analyze their strengths and weaknesses. Someone unfamiliar with film would be baffled. But Katharine Hepburn wasn't someone who acted in films and then didn't see them herself. Coming from a theater background, and one of the few actresses of the Golden Age who devoted themselves to developing their acting skills rather than relying solely on their own acting, Katharine understood what Henry was saying. This undoubtedly gave the aging star the feeling of having met a kindred spirit. Katharine exclaimed, "So you said you're a fan of mine, not just of that other Hepburn. It seems you weren't lying, Mom." Henry began to speak, but was interrupted. "Call me Katharine," the star smiled graciously. "Very well, Katharine. I wouldn't lie to a beautiful and talented woman like you. If I were to say something casually, or even lie, you'd be able to tell." Tony Stark, unable to contain himself, finally muttered, "Smooch." Everyone heard, but no one took it seriously. Everyone smiled and continued chatting, clearly well informed about Tony Stark's personality. Katharine continued, "In that case, Henry, let me test you. Go ahead. Recently, film critics have been criticizing me for still making movies after I turned 40. As a result, I can only rely on sentimentality to maintain a half-dead box office. What do you think?" Take these people's words as bullshit, Katharine. There are many reasons for the poor box office, but I think Hollywood studios bear the lion's share of the responsibility. Oh, that's fresh. Finally, I've heard an answer other than criticizing the audience for being too sophisticated, Henry commented sarcastically, because in Hollywood films, the types and age ranges of women are quite narrow. They're either beautiful young girls, voluptuous mature women, or mean old women. There are so many different types of women. Yet, film studios use box office success as an excuse to restrict their screens to these specific types. They don't just talk, they act out, and then they force actresses to play these roles, regardless of whether they're qualified or not. When they fail or fall short of their expectations, they put the blame on the actresses. Of course, it's not your fault. In the film industry, actors are just one piece of the puzzle. Even if you offer your youthful beauty and superb acting skills, the camera can still turn you into a complete mess. Or else, the director, editor, and producer can easily ruin a film. But do any of them ever admit their mistakes? No one, and the actors are the perfect scapegoats. Given the right script, a capable director, a producer who isn't overconfident to the point of superstition, and an actor like you could create another classic film. No matter what, a film's success is the perfect combination of all aspects. Similarly, failure can be caused by many factors. In my opinion, the actors are the least responsible, because actors are cast, they then, under the director's guidance, perform before the camera. If an actor truly performs poorly, shouldn't the casting team be at fault? With so many actors in Hollywood, are these the only ones to choose from? If the actor performs well and the film still fails, is there any need to pinpoint the problem? It won't be the actors. Besides, what's wrong with selling nostalgia? Would the audience prefer to see a newcomer whose age and appearance are suitable for the role, but whose acting is actually awkward? Instead of choosing a mature actor with decent acting skills and experience, it sounded like a positive assessment, but Katharine disagreed. Instead, she said, "While I agree with most of what you said, there's always a sense of, I'm an old woman, so I should play old woman roles. That's even more infuriating." Henry now said awkwardly, "Actually, that's not the point I wanted to make." Tony laughed heartily and said, "Yes, Katharine, you're welcome. This kid just relies on his cleverness to talk down to others. He deserves a lesson." Everyone looked at Tony Stark with puzzled expressions. Katharine Hepburn even said, "Tony, why don't you listen to what you just said? Why do you think this problem only affects others?" Katharine Hepburn's stabbing remark was a real blow to Tony's heart. But looking at the old lady's expression, he gave up. This person can always find the exact location of the stab in other people's words. No matter how genius one's brain is, there is no guarantee that one's words will be flawless. This has been certified by 2 generations of Stark father and son. So Tony looked at the boss, who didn't say much and seemed a little bored, and said, "Alex, let's go to the study and talk. There is my father's collection of whiskey there, Howard's collection. I must try it. If I expect him to take it out himself, I don't know how long I have to wait." The financial tycoon followed Tony. He left his wife behind to chat about movies with Henry and Catherine. Henry was deliberately kept by the 2 women with the topic of movies, and he understood what they meant. Those 2 were probably looking for an opportunity to talk privately, so he shouldn't be so tactless as to ask for a sip of whiskey. In fact, Tony invited Alex Hart and his wife to attend through Catherine. This tycoon, who usually works in New York, rarely came to California for vacation, which gave Tony an opportunity. He agreed to attend the dinner, of course, not because the 2 of them had a deep personal relationship. If it really came to friendship, perhaps Howard could come forward and the 2 of them could have some relationship. Tony Stark's nephew would ask him to dinner, so there must be some purpose. Alex Hart was curious about what this purpose was, so he attended this private dinner. Chapter 83, Secret Meeting in the Study. Howard Stark's study was completely different from the typical wealthy study. It wasn't filled with cabinets of hardcover and antique books, purely decorative displays that might go unread for years. Instead, it was filled with periodicals, bound manuscripts, and typed manuscripts, some standing upright, others stacked. Every book, or book-like object, looked as if it had been read countless times. Various labels jutted from the tops and sides of the volumes, while some were open to specific pages and stacked together. Alex Hart, who had entered, noticed that the books in the study looked untidy, suggesting the owner hadn't been here for a long time. Despite regular cleaning, a fine dust cloud was still visible. After Tony closed the door, he poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a wide-mouthed glass at the liquor cabinet, one for himself and one for the invited guests. Alex Hart took the glass, took a sip, and said, "It's worthy of being Howard's collection. It's really delicious." Tony Stark also took a sip. Although it didn't taste the same as when he sneaked in to drink it when he was underage, after trying the cheap wine in the bar outside, he could still tell the value of this bottle of wine. "Tony. Can I call you Tony?" Alex Hart said. "Yes, you can." "Well, Tony, you specially invited me through Catherine. You didn't come here to drink up all of Howard's collection, did you?" The polite part was enough in the casual conversation in the living room, so after the financial tycoon entered the study, he got straight to the point. Tony Stark was obviously impatient to continue talking about useless things, and asked, "You know the murder case that happened a while ago? The case in which I was involved?" "Oh, that one, I noticed it. I heard that a lot of Silicon Valley, well, what do you say, upstarts, were also involved in this matter. But it seemed to be left unresolved later, and I haven't heard of any subsequent news reports." "Yes, that's right. What if I say that the FBI agents who represent that day were all fakes, and the gunman I left behind that day, including the body, disappeared in the end? Do you think this matter is normal?" Alex was silent for a moment and asked, "Did you investigate? Because I was involved in it. It's normal to want to know the subsequent developments." "You didn't ask Howard. I'm an adult and don't need a nominal father to take care of me." With a sigh, Alex said, "Okay, you continue." Tony Stark continued, "I spoke with the LAPD, and they insisted that the case and all evidence had been turned over to the FBI. However, the FBI's Los Angeles branch insisted they hadn't taken the case and didn't even have any relevant records. I also spoke with those who attended the party that day, but no one mentioned the incident, as if nothing had happened. So I began to investigate. But the difficulty and resistance were greater than I imagined. Mainly, I didn't have the necessary means to force those who knew the truth to tell me what I wanted to know. Then I remembered that day's incident. One of the gunmen said he wanted to serve as a warning to everyone. That's why they chose to act in such a public manner. They also knew that there were many people they couldn't afford to offend. So, instead of trying to figure out who's behind this, I think it's better to find someone who understands the warnings and ask them directly what's going on." "Right, so that's why you came to me," Alex said with a wry smile. "I still say the same thing. You should ask Howard. That's the right thing to do. I don't want to." "So," Tony Stark pointed at the man before him, his meaning clear. Alex Hart gulped down his whiskey and refilled his glass, saying, "You're entitled to know, so it's not against my will to tell you, but once I leave this room today, I won't admit to saying anything. If you're planning on implicating me, I'll just say it's the paranoia of a genius. I hope you don't get to that point. Tony Stark pretended to zip up his zipper and said, I just want to know what's going on. Alex moistened his throat and said, there's an island off the coast of California where some wealthy people have secret entertainment. Because those activities might not quite comply with state laws, everyone tacitly remains silent. You mean like the Red Sofa in Hollywood, maybe even wilder, Alex said, but at the same time denied. Don't think I've been to the island and seen the world. You know, although they will extend an invitation, the choice of whether to go or not is still in your hands, Tony Stark asked puzzledly. No matter how wild it is, there are still different ways to play? If there is no island, will these capable people not play? Don't think that silver fun is the only theme of the island, Tony. In fact, the island also provides many special medical services that you can't find in regular medical institutions. This revelation gave Tony Stark a lot of clarity. What often hinders medical advancement and achievement isn't technical problems, but ethical ones. This realization instilled in Tony an inexplicable aversion to this so-called island. Alex, noticing the change in the young man's expression, cautioned, don't think this is a bad thing. Existence is justified. Just like profanity, it can't be truly banned. If ever you or someone close to you needs it, you'll be thankful the island exists. So what does this have to do with that warning? Giving up on the underlying story, Tony Stark delved directly into the more personal details. Alex asked, since those services are unaffordable for ordinary people, why share them with so many unrelated people? Do you think those struggling to support themselves could afford the enormous costs they might earn in their lifetimes? If those poor souls knew, there are only two things they do. One is to demand the same services for free, and the other is to prevent anyone from receiving them. You don't think that's a good thing, do you? It's like the old saying, they never ask what they've done for their country, only what their country has given them. So, the man who died was a big mouth, Tony asked. Yes, he let too many uncensored people know about this. The host didn't want things to get out of control without him seeing them. So they wanted to silence him, and at the same time, warn others. Chapter 84, Height Determines Vision. Who's the host? Tony Stark asked. Alex said honestly, at my level, I have no way of knowing their identities. But there are two people vying to be the external face of this, who? A little guy named Epstein, and a guy named Puff Daddy. A guy? Tony was shocked. Yes, things in this world are so incredible. A Nico who has used dirty means to control a lot of Hollywood resources, thinks that he can be on par with us. I remember that guy is a rapper who has just risen. This kid is smart, but he has no self-knowledge, Tony asked. So, the killer is one of these two people? No. The relationship between the killer and the island is just a simple employment. Including those people you guessed are fake FBI, I think they are from the Aftermath team. Which killer organization is so powerful? CIA, maybe the CIA has a secret organization, I don't know. But I guess there's only one organization on the West Coast that has the ability to use a fake FBI identity to conceal the truth. Which one? Continental Hotel. Have you heard of this name, Tony? No, I haven't. How can I find them? Why bother looking for them, Tony? They're just tools. Even if you ask them to settle the score, as long as you can pay the price, the people who offended you will be gone the next day. But the entire organization will still be there. You can't eliminate them unless you just want to vent your anger. Isn't there anyone who cares about these things? Tony said angrily. Alex, on the other hand, was drinking and telling the truth. They are also part of the United States. Just like the Earth we live on, there is no way to keep only the daytime part and let the nighttime part disappear forever. Tony Stark remained silent. After a moment, he finished the whiskey in his glass and asked, I want to know one more thing. Ask. But I can't guarantee I can answer. Is Howard, my father, involved in these businesses? I don't know if you're worried about him having a hand in them, or if you're surprised he doesn't have a hand in such a big business. I won't ask you what you feel. But I can say the answer to this question is no. Are you sure? Let me put it this way, Tony. These businesses have been around for a long time. Howard is a genius, and he used his genius to gain the support of the military. But he's not qualified to get involved in these businesses. After Alex finished speaking, he continued, I hope this answer doesn't offend you, but this is the truth. Howard is a smart man and has accumulated considerable wealth, but not enough to be on par with those people. Perhaps from the time you take over, And for another 3 or 5 generations, you can maintain the current prosperity of Stark Industries, or even do better. By then, you won't have to sign up. The Stark family will naturally join that group. Who are they? Tony asked again. Alex raised his glass and answered, whether you have heard of these names or not, the Red Shoes Society, the White Shirt Society, the Freemasons, the Illuminati, the Skull and Bones Society of Yale, the Old Money, the Blue Blood Aristocracy or the Hydra, etc. Some have survived to this day, some have disappeared in history, and some have just been hidden. But they are all just a small group within a large group, formed by a small number of people gathering together. The large group has no name, nor does it have any gatherings, oaths or other activities. When you reach that height, your vision will naturally see those scenes. It's disgusting. They don't think that everyone is proud to join them, Tony criticized. Of course, not everyone is interested in such behavior. So they can only hide under the table and cannot become a formal force or organization. This is the only thing to be thankful for. Alex followed Tony's words. The two wanted to continue talking when the servant of the villa knocked on the door and said, Master Tony, dinner is ready. Alex finished his drink and said, I've pretty much told you everything I know. If there's anything else you want to know, you'll have to find the answers yourself. I don't know much more. Well, I hired a chef for today's French meal. I hope his cooking doesn't disappoint. Let's go try it. Henry and the others had already taken their seats at the table. Since they were 2 men, no one stood up to greet them before they sat down. Seeing Tony return, Katharine Hepburn chuckled and said, Tony, where did you meet this friend? He doesn't seem like someone the Starks would know. This veiled remark left Tony Stark unsure how to respond. Henry smiled and said, well, maybe our initial meeting wasn't exactly friendly. Katharine, is that what you want to hear? Oh, unfriendly. That's what makes it worth listening to, isn't it? Although Katharine was answering, her eyes were looking at the bewildered Tony Stark. The teased Tony could only point at Henry and said, you, don't say it. Then he turned to the servants of the villa and said, and you, serve the food quickly. Haha, I'm more and more interested in knowing things that can embarrass the men of the Stark family. Katharine smiled happily. Tony Stark still said stubbornly, those things are not interesting at all, and I'm protecting him. Otherwise, he would have been finished long ago. Oh, little Henry, is that really the case? Katharine looked at the other party and asked. Henry spread his hands and said, yes, just as Mr. Stark said, it's taboo to talk too much with someone you just met. If you don't have a close relationship and you keep trying to sabotage someone, you'll only make enemies. Henry didn't want to offend this person. Little did he know that his attitude made Tony Stark even more furious. Fortunately, before the young master could find any words to refute, the waiter from the chef team had already brought the apéritif. This showed that the meal had officially begun. Tony drank the apéritif in one gulp, then shook the glass and asked someone to pour it again. The cold wine calmed him down a little. Then he said, I know you still want to say that if you do nothing, the gunman will leave in the end. But before that, who knows about this kind of thing? Okay, I roughly know. But what about the gunman? Little Tony, do you want to explain it to me? Katharine asked with a forced smile. Oh, damn it. Tony Stockton, having let his mouth slip, felt like a thorn in his side. He had 2 versions of his explanation to the outside world. To his own people, he always said he was just passing through and looking for a place to hide, but he never told anyone that he had confronted the killer head-on. To the outside world, he claimed to have killed everyone, but everyone assumed it was just bragging. Who knew it was the truth? Chapter 85 Questions and Answers at the Table. Western cuisine doesn't prohibit talking while eating, or perhaps the slow pace of serving food is designed to allow for greater enjoyment of the food, as well as for conversation and bonding. Despite Katharine Hepburn's pressure, Tony Stark reluctantly recounted his encounter with Henry. Katharine, who had just finished a spear of asparagus, said, so, when you first met, little Tony and that guy were humiliated by Henry. No, I wasn't. It was that guy who was embarrassed, not me, Tony Stark argued. Henry, can you really solve such a complicated problem in an instant? Facing the question, Henry smiled and said, of course not. Even the smartest mathematician needs the help of tools to calculate the answer. How can I know it at a glance? Then you are, as long as you are full of confidence and talk nonsense seriously. Those who lack self-confidence will involuntarily believe someone's nonsense. That's why so many people like to watch movies. Otherwise, There will be so many illogical plots or shots that violate physical phenomena. Well, you talk like a filmmaker. If you don't believe that what you make can be a hit, how can you convince the film companies and convince the audience to buy tickets to the theater? Tony, who finally found a chance to interrupt, retorted, but this is not scientific at all. In fact, even now he doubts the answer Henry said at the beginning. Is it really just a casual talk? It was obviously the same answer as his. But Catherine criticized, Tony, we are talking about a movie channel, not the Discovery Channel. If everything has to be scientific, George Lucas's Star Wars will be doomed, Tony muttered. Anyway, it's not scientific, so when we met for the second time, Tony was really so rude. He ate as soon as he saw something on the table. No matter what others said, Catherine could always jump out of her original perspective and comment on something with a clear eye. Tony Stark protested, I sponsored that chef team out of my own pocket, and I paid for the ingredients. Why can't I eat dishes made with that food? Nodding in agreement without hesitation, Henry said, yeah, of course. But at least you have to make your presence known, so people know the boss is here. Otherwise, who would know if the person who stole other people's food was a homeless person or something else? After refuting, Henry turned to Catherine and asked, are all Stark men like this? No matter where they go, they assume that others must know them. This symptom of excessive self-confidence seems incurable. Yeah, it's already a terminal illness, and it's a family hereditary disease. I sincerely hope that their next generation will improve, Catherine said. Then she asked, by the way, Henry, I know about your third meeting with Tony the Younger. You followed him around and shot him in the back. What happened before that made you show up in such a wet and macy state? Just because Tony didn't ask this question didn't mean he didn't want to know. So when Catherine asked, he remained silent, eager to hear Henry's side of the story. Henry briefly recounted his encounter with Justin, and how the chubby guy had thrown his cell phone into the pool and asked someone to pick it up. After listening, Tony spoke up first. That's why you didn't want to save him. Because the chubby guy offended you first, Henry explained. I have to say, I only just learned the shooter's target, Josh Hilton, was the chubby guy. Before then, the person was the person, the name was the name. I didn't connect the two, so if I gave you a second chance, would you save him? Tony asked. Still not, Henry said, his expression serious. Let's not even talk about my job as a bodyguard for the banquet company. That's just dealing with drunks or high. Dealing with gunmen isn't my job. Besides, I've already quit, and to the banquet, I'm just an unarmed passerby. My priority is protecting myself, not cleaning up the mess of those rich guys. But you still helped little Tony, didn't you? Catherine said. Tony Stark said dissatisfiedly, I protected him. If it weren't for the fact that there would be one more gun, and he wouldn't be like a novice who would empty the gun with a bang. Henry said this in a sarcastic tone. Unfortunately, the American didn't understand his tone, and Henry didn't want to explain anything, allowing Tony to brag about his prowess. Henry simply struggled seriously with the asparagus on his plate, which was the main course for the day, and then casually made up a joke to help Tony brag about his own performance. Considering the guest of honor, Katharine Hepburn, who is already 84 years old, the dishes Tony ordered were the best combination discussed by the chef and nutritionist. There would be meat dishes, but the portions were smaller and stewed until soft and tender, suitable for the elderly. Alex Hard and his wife were at an age where they pursued healthy eating, so they naturally had no complaints about this meal. The two young men also ate with relish, and Henry's table manners were even better than Tony, the rich young man. Henry even chatted with the waiter in French, praising the taste of the food. All this made the elders feel more favorable towards this young man. Catherine looked at him with a kind and gentle gaze and asked, Little Henry, what are your plans for the future? You are now a small actor in Hollywood, according to little Tony. Was she trying to use her connections in Hollywood to repay Tony's favor? It seems that Katharine Hepburn was quite caring towards this guy who was almost like her own child. However, Henry did not want this favor. He shook his head and said, I came to Hollywood to see the world. Although I have been here for less than half a year, I think I will change my career sooner or later. Don't you want to be a big star? Catherine asked with a smile. It's not that I don't want to be a big star, but I don't want to pay the price required to be a big star. I would rather live a more free life. Henry didn't say the line. Although Katharine Hepburn was still in the Hollywood circle and had a certain influence, she was not a golden thigh to support someone. Besides, the favor Tony owed was not to the extent that Catherine had to do her utmost to repay it. If it was just an opportunity, Henry didn't want to gamble with the future of Hollywood. Chapter 86 Unexpected Job Opportunity. After hearing Henry's answer, Catherine sighed and said, "What a shame. When I was young, I loved performing, and that hobby blinded me, preventing me from seeing what Hollywood was really like. By the time I saw it clearly, I was already trapped in it, unable to escape. If I had the chance to do it all over again, I'd probably just stay in that theater," Henry said regretfully. "Then the world would have lost a star named Katharine Hepburn. I don't want to continue in the film industry, simply because I don't think I have the potential to become a big star, nor am I suited to it." "How could that be?" "You acted really well," Catherine said, a sly look in her eyes. "Haha, you can tell." Henry didn't deny it, but he didn't admit it either. "In that case," Catherine took a sip of her wine, thought for a moment, and asked, "Can you drive?" Henry nodded and replied, "Yes." Catherine turned and asked, "Little Tony, what did you think of Henry's performance?" "What performance?" Tony was puzzled. "It's about his performance in the gunfight," Tony Stark said with a disdainful tone. "It's okay, at least he didn't hold anyone back." He asked again, "Why do you want to know this?" Catherine said, "You know, I and another Ms. Hepburn." Ms. Hepburn made a double quotation mark gesture with her hand beside her cheek. "Are friends. Not long ago, the driver who had been serving her retired. And since she became a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador in 1988, she has been visiting various places. Soon there will be a trip to Somalia in Africa. I heard that the local situation is a bit unstable, so I thought about finding a reliable driver for this friend and a bodyguard who can accompany her around the world." When Henry heard this, his eyes lit up. He nodded repeatedly and pointed at himself desperately. All he needed was a dog's tail wagging like a helicopter propeller to take him to the sky. Catherine didn't mind Henry's self-recommendation. But she still said, "I just want to know if you have any reasons that are strong enough for me to feel that it is reliable to recommend you to Audrey as a driver." Henry could understand Catherine's worries. After all, today was the first time Henry and Catherine had met. Because they had a slight liking for each other, she introduced him to her friend. If something happened because of this, not to mention the issue of who should be held responsible, Catherine would probably feel guilty for the rest of her life. Rich people like them, when they want to hire someone, they will do a background check, an investigation of 3 generations, and a loyalty test, and they will only hire the person after they pass all of them. If it was just a simple employment interview, the most suitable bodyguard and driver in the United States could be found among the group of veterans. Does Henry have more valuable skills that are worthy of Catherine recommending to her friend? Or a more powerful guarantee? So when Catherine said these words, she was actually looking at Tony. She wanted to know what Tony Stark thought of Henry, and whether it was enough for her to make such a recommendation. But Henry didn't want to gamble whether his friendship with Tony was enough to serve as a guarantee. Because in fact it was not enough, and Henry knew it very well. Being summoned to today's private dinner was simply a stroke of genius on the young master's part. Perhaps he was just using Ms. Hepburn as bait to make someone laugh. It's unclear whether today's performance satisfied the young master. But wanting him to guarantee his services, Henry felt it would be better to give himself a little leverage. While this went against his own desire for a quiet life, meeting Audrey Hepburn in person seemed like a reasonable way to expose a little of his abilities. He expected this to be a difficult choice, but Henry made it almost without a second thought. "Tony, my friend, do you have a gun? A pistol would be fine." "Lend me one, Walt." "What do you need a gun for? You don't look like someone who believes in going to hell if you commit suicide." "If you want to go, you'll have to find another way," Tony retaliated with a measured retort. Henry immediately turned and asked, "Mr. Hart, I know this request is a bit presumptuous, but I promise I'm not trying to hurt anyone. I just want to prove a small point." Speaking of which is easier said than done. "So, do you have a gun?" Alex Hart seemed to be thinking about something, and said, "Maybe my driver may have it on him. Shall we call him in now, please?" After a while, a big white man in a black suit came to the restaurant under the guidance of the villa servant. Henry said to the man, "Sir, do you have a gun on you? I'd like to borrow it from you, Mr. Hart." The big white man looked at his employer. He didn't dare to hand the gun to someone he didn't know easily, especially when he had no other weapons. Although Alex Hart wanted to see if the result was as he guessed, he hesitated when the time came. Is it a good thing to let a stranger have a weapon? Henry probably guessed the concerns of these people, and he changed his words and said, "Well, sir, you don't need to hand over the gun to me, please just shoot at my palm. Anyway, you probably wouldn't dare to shoot somewhere else if I asked you to." The big white man had never seen such a situation before, where someone would actually ask others to shoot him. So he still looked at his employer hesitantly, hoping to get clear instructions. As if to reassure the other party's thoughts, Henry continued, "Go ahead and shoot. I will definitely not hold you responsible or ask for compensation afterwards." At the same time, Henry stretched out his right hand to the side, away from his body. At the same time, he said, "You can stand closer and shoot, so as not to be difficult to hit from too far away." This time Alex Hart did not have too many concerns and nodded to his personal bodyguard. The big white man then pulled out a Beretta 92F pistol from the holster under his arm and aimed it at Henry's outstretched palm. He did not dare to get too close. Even before shooting, he made sure again and again. "Sir, are you sure you want me to shoot your palm?" "Yes, I am sure," Henry replied. "No regrets." "What should I regret? Anyway, you are right to shoot, don't be like a pussy." Bang! The shot surprised everyone present. But Henry's palm just concaved slightly and retreated a little. He then showed his palm to everyone at the table. There was no injury at all, not to mention a hole on it. "Look, everyone, I'm fine," Henry said proudly. Chapter 87, A Genius Like a Fool. "Wow," Catherine was the first to exclaim in admiration. "Little Henry, you're not afraid of bullets, is that true?" "Well, I'd say it hurts, but it won't penetrate." Henry lied a little here. It couldn't have hurt. Even the slight dent in his palm and the repulsive movement were just an act. Henry didn't want to appear too monstrous in the eyes of others. "Wait a minute," Tony Stark shouted, silencing the others who wanted to speak. He lowered his head and thought seriously. "Let me think about it." Anything to think about?" Henry was puzzled. "So, during the shootout, it was like you were following me in an impenetrable body armor. And I foolishly assumed you needed to be taken care of, so I stood in front of you, shielding you from danger. Is that what you're saying?" Henry threw his hands up, his expression demanding a beating. "Mr. Tony Stark, I believe I advised you not to get involved in the shootout and to just hide somewhere. As for what happened afterwards, why can't you understand that I was protecting you from potential bullets from behind, even though getting attacked from behind never happened to me?" Tony stood up, his tone growing increasingly agitated. "So, I was like a naked guy, guns blazing, shooting at a bunch of professional killers. And you could just walk up to them and beat them up one by one. Is that what you're saying?" Henry replied seriously. "That's impossible. Any normal person, seeing an opponent immune to their weapons and coming towards them, would know to get out of the way." A certain Kryptonian avoided the question of beating people. "So," Tony Stark pounded the table excitedly and said, "what I risked my life to do is like entering a paintball field to play a survival game for you." "Well, sir, if you want to make a metaphor like that, it's not wrong. It's just that I think you can think about the problem calmly." "How do you expect me to be calm? You never talked about this kind of thing." "If you had told me, I would definitely have other solutions." Instead of rushing up and shooting at others like a fool, Tony was about to explode. "This kind of thing," Henry widened his eyes and said in disbelief, "who would talk about it all day long, afraid that others don't know? Do you expect me to introduce myself to you the moment we meet? Hi, hello. I'm Henry Brown, an alien from Krypton. I can fly, shoot sparks from my eyes, blow storms from my mouth, and am invulnerable to weapons, fire, and water." If I said that, 90% of people would think I'm crazy, and the rest would think I'm joking. "Because how am I supposed to prove all that? Didn't you prove it today?" Tony said excitedly. "That's because of the interview. I had to provide evidence to prove I'm qualified to be a driver and bodyguard, so I did this. Otherwise, would I shoot myself in front of every new person I met? Even a psychopath wouldn't do that, but you can say it. Whether they believe it or not is their own problem." "Oh, so Mr. Stark, you'll tell everyone." "Hello, I'm Tony Stark. My father is Howard Stark, and Stark Industries is my family business. I'm currently studying at Caltech, and I'm a genius." "Wait." Tony interrupted Henry and said, "I started studying electrical engineering at MIT at the age of 14 and eventually obtained a PhD in engineering physics. I'm on vacation at Caltech, and by the way, I'm studying for a PhD in aerospace engineering." "You're right about being a genius. But I'm not an ordinary Caltech student." Yeah, Henry raised his hands to the sky, and said, Then will you show off these things to everyone you meet? Are you afraid that others don't know, and you tell others every time you see them? Of course I won't do things like a peacock showing off its feathers. And I want to emphasize that although my last name is Stark, I haven't asked my family for money since I was 12 years old. Including tuition, I paid for it with the income from my own patents. Yeah, why do you think I have to talk about things you won't do every day? Master Stark, maybe it was because Henry's tone was too contemptible, Tony's anger was directly redirected, and he emphasized himself again. I said, call me Tony. I have no other relationship with the other Mr. Stark except blood, haha. Henry looked around the big room. Tony's clothes worth at least 5 figures, and the French meal with dessert already on the table, and he couldn't help but retort, your genius doesn't think that only accepting money from your parents counts as taking money from your family. Aside from inheriting Stark Industries, everything else is self-made, right? You earned everything here on your own. Tony paused, his voice trailing off. Having a house to live in, clothes to wear, food to eat, isn't that normal? If I were to refuse even that, wouldn't I be being too hypocritical? Haha, yeah, Henry said no more. Any further would sound critical. Wait a minute. You're making me faint. Is what you just said true? Those aliens and stuff, Tony, as if awakened, brought the conversation back to Henry. Henry slapped his forehead and said, oh my god, Tony, can't you tell the truth from a lie? If I told you I could break dimensional boundaries with a punch and travel across worlds by running, would you believe it or not? Tony, of course, didn't believe Henry's outrageous description. But he had personally verified that his body could block bullets. He thought for a moment and said, so, you actually had a chance to save Josh Hilton. Right, no, I didn't. He wouldn't admit he could have saved him, even if he was beaten to death. Besides, he just didn't want to save him, so what? How is that possible? You're obviously not afraid of bullets. You could have taken a bullet for that fat guy. You wouldn't have ignored an innocent man being shot because of a personal vendetta. Henry said, I'm not a judge, so I can't say for sure whether that fat guy is innocent. Besides, if I wanted to save him, I had to run first. Then, before the gunman could fire, I'd get in front of that fat guy, who was larger than me. Do you think my actions would distract the last group of gunmen, giving me a chance to save them? Considering the flower bed they were hiding in and the crowd controlled by the gunmen, it was impossible to save anyone without super speed. But Tony said dissatisfiedly, but you didn't even try. To waste effort on something you know is impossible is the work of a saint. I'm just an ordinary person with special abilities. Chapter 88, Son Pays Father's Debt. But your ability allows you to help more people, Tony continued to emphasize. Henry didn't waste too much time on this kind of moral debate, but directly asked, Tony, your family is very rich, right? Well, even if we don't talk about your family, you yourself are also rich, right? Although a little unhappy, Tony Stark did not deny this and said, that's right. It's not a sin to be rich, of course not. Then I say, take out your or your family's money and give 10,000 to each poor person. Then we can realize the great vision of an America without poor people, isn't it? Tony was surprised and said, the redistribution of wealth doesn't work like this. Do you need me to introduce you to some economics-related books? Besides, my family's wealth has nothing to do with those poor people. Yes, your family's wealth is your family's business, and of course you have no obligation to share it with the poor. Then, just because I can be bulletproof, should I help people all over the world block bullets? If someone is shot on the future, should it be blamed on me because I didn't block the bullet? Tony wasn't deterred by such quibbles. Instead, he said, Stark Industries has charitable programs. It's not that we don't help the poor, but we don't use crude methods to distribute the money. By the same token, I think it's unfair that all the people shot around the world should be counted on you. But you're wasting the talent God gave you by not helping where you can see it. Henry sighed inwardly, truly worthy of being a future hero. With Tony Stark, the future world's richest man, he had many ways to help others, but he chose to do it himself. What a rare and precious sentiment. Henry, determined to live a simple life, didn't find such a thing amusing. But that didn't mean he had to imitate the other person's actions or share the same moral standards. So, Henry said seriously, I believe that not using this talent for evil is the greatest kindness I can do to the world. While I don't mind helping others, I'm not selflessly lending a helping hand to everyone. Ultimately, I have neither the obligation nor the incentive to do so. How about this? $1 million annual salary, and you'll do my work for me and follow my lead. The wealthy Tony finally showed off his financial muscle. Henry smiled sweetly, then decisively said, "No, why? Isn't that the same as wanting to be Audrey Hepburn's driver and bodyguard? Or do you think the pay isn't enough?" Tisk 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 tisk. Henry shook his index finger and said, "I don't know what you're hiring me for, but I'm guessing it'll just be a daily bodyguard, a human shield, or maybe it's like being a vigilante, stirring up trouble everywhere. Oh, no, I should say helping others for free, as long as it satisfies my vanity. You're willing to pay me for this, rather than asking me to do it for free. That's a noble act. But helping you and Ms. Hepburn, no matter which one I help, is not the same thing." "Of course it's the same," Tony protested. Henry analyzed seriously, employed by Tony Stark, with an annual salary of $1 million. "But I don't know how much I'll have to spend on therapists to heal the psychological trauma I've suffered while being commanded, employed by Ms. Hepburn. Well, I don't know what the going rate for a full-time driver is. But whether it's 30 or 50,000, I'm open to it. The most important thing is that the joy I feel from serving both Ms. Hepburns is priceless." Catherine, who had been watching the show, said happily, "Wow, that's really sweet. Come here, good boy, and I'll give you a bite of pudding." Henry obediently put his mouth close to hers, and Catherine was like a kind old grandmother feeding her grandson. One was happily feeding, and the other was eating with relish. The two of them had explosive acting skills, and the degree of exaggeration was 100%, which made people around them feel sick. Henry, with an intoxicated look on his face, said, "Sure enough. The pudding that Catherine feeds personally tastes different. It's so delicious." Tony, who was the first to bear the brunt of the criticism, of course shouted in dissatisfaction, "Our puddings are all the same." The same. At the same time, he put the pudding plate in front of him directly on his mouth and swallowed the dessert carefully prepared by the chef in one gulp. Henry shook his head and said, "Tisk tisk tisk, how can I put it? Scientists really don't understand the romance of artists. Even if the chemical composition and physical properties are exactly the same, can it feel the same if you feed them in different ways? It seems like if Mr. Tony wanted to give someone a gift, he'd probably have them buy it themselves, wish themselves a happy birthday, and then take the receipt to Stark Industries to file a claim. He wouldn't care what they bought in the end." Actually, this was a Kryptonian who had preemptively predicted what Tony Young Master would do, but it unexpectedly caused Catherine to burst into laughter, and then burst into laughter. Seeing Catherine's laughter, everyone was puzzled at first, then suddenly realized something. Henry even said, "Could it be that Mr. Stark Sr. did something like this?" Tony Stark looked embarrassed, but Catherine nodded repeatedly, saying, "I almost thought you were teasing Tony Young with that kind of talk because you heard some rumors. Anyone who says that this world's Starks aren't real is going to be a mess. Little Stark doesn't even know how much he knows about his own father's affairs." But seeing his sullen expression, unsure how to respond, it was clear that his claim that those romantic affairs hadn't affected the younger Stark was a lie. Just the idea of Tony meeting Catherine, with a 60-plus-year age gap between them, couldn't have been love at first sight at a bar. But in a situation like this, Henry could only play assisting roles, not the main attacker, to avoid attracting hatred. Besides, Catherine's magic defense was maxed out, and the future Iron Man wouldn't dare even touch her. As a main attacker and tank, she'd be unstoppable. Not to mention Catherine's voracious attacking instincts, charging at Tony whenever she got a chance, as if to return the damage done to the elder Stark to the younger. This was a case of the son paying for the father's debt. As a man who enjoys a carefree life, Henry regretted not having a camera with him to record this historic moment. Otherwise, he'd be laughing until he was buried in his grave. But Catherine was tactful, she wouldn't really embarrass Tony. Just from her ability to read people's expressions, it's clear that her decades in Hollywood haven't been wasted. Everyone here is a shrewd person, only the future Iron Man is a novice. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 89, Sending Guests Away. After the dinner, unlike other banquets, there were no second or third meetings or other entertainment programs. Alex Hard and his wife left first. Before leaving, he not only gave Henry a personal business card, but also left Henry's contact number. His eyes were intriguing. Catherine came to Los Angeles this time to stay in the Stark family's villa, so she did not plan to move. However, she also exchanged contact information with Henry and said, "I will contact Audrey about your work. But we don't live in Los Angeles, so we have to make an appointment to meet. So be patient, kid. If you want to see the big star you admire, another Ms. Hepburn. And the decision is in her hands, you understand that?" "I understand, Catherine." Henry just thanked her and didn't say much. Because if he said too much, the Ms. Hepburn in front of him would get jealous. Even a Kryptonian couldn't stand the jealousy of an 80-year-old. Walking out of the house, Henry was surprised to find that the flashy red Ferrari was still there. Tony was standing next to the car smoking. As soon as he saw someone coming out, he stepped on the remaining cigarette butt and said, "Get in the car, I'll take you home." "Oh, I thought I had to walk home by myself," Henry joked. Tony said unhappily, "I brought you here, so it's normal to take you home. And I don't want you to walk around this rich area all night. You won't encounter a robber, Nico, but you will encounter nosy police. So get in the car. If I kick your ass, your place will be in the front trunk." This flashy Ferrari has a mid-engine, so the luggage compartment is at the front of the car. The car wasn't big, at least from Henry's X-ray vision. To fit him in, he'd have to break his arms or legs into several pieces. Henry, of course, didn't want to stay in the trunk, so he got in. Tony slammed the accelerator, squeezing himself into the seat. The engine roared, as if venting Tony's emotions, instantly reaching its red line. Even though it was a grip-heavy sports car, Tony managed to pull off a drift. The gates had slowly opened earlier, leaving just enough space for a car to pass through as the Ferrari passed through. Clearly, every moment was calculated. One had to admit, Tony Stark possessed a remarkable talent for vehicle control. That's why, in the film, he was able to drive a Formula One car in a formal race at the Monte Carlo circuit in Morocco. While the car's design wasn't exactly F1, it was probably only F2. But getting a racing license wasn't easy, and not everyone could drive in a formal race. However, once on the official road, Tony didn't start racing, instead adhering to the speed limit. The Ferrari's engine rev settled into a steady range, neither near idle in high gear nor near the engine's maximum speed. Henry knew from this that Tony had something to say, or else he would have been sending him packing. Tony was neither used to nor satisfied with his rejection. He then brought it up again. "Why didn't you accept my job offer?" "You're bringing it up again," Henry asked. "Do you think my abilities can be used for anything besides taking bullets?" Tony paused for a moment, then said, "Shouldn't mutants like you find ways to use your gifts to better integrate into the lives of ordinary people?" So he thought he was a mutant. Henry, not wanting to clear up the misunderstanding, asked, "So, our genius, Mr. Tony, can you tell me what kind of people America's top lawyers serve? What kind of people can afford to hire these elite lawyers?" This question silenced Tony again. Henry continued, "If someone had to hire me as a bulletproof person, they'd have to have done something to make someone want to shoot them. Of those people, I think 9 out of 10 are bad people. And the remaining 1, I doubt they can afford to pay me. So, is it really a good thing for me to earn this kind of money against my conscience? What if you're talking about being a vigilante, saving people? Don't you think by the time I get there, the person might already be dead, and the police will just come and arrest me as a suspect? How desperate would I be to do such a thankless job?" So, volunteering to be Ms. Hepburn's driver and bodyguard was the best solution I could think of. At least she's a good person, and I could be useful in a place like Africa. More importantly, she can at least pay me a basic salary. I won't have to work for nothing like other poor people. Tony now understood that Henry's attitude wasn't about being unwilling to help others, nor was it about wasting his talent. He simply chose the people he helped, and he did it in a way that was impeccable. Henry continued, "If you're disappointed by rejecting your job offer today, I'm truly sorry. But let me be clear, I didn't really mean to reject you. You can see that, Mr. Tony, the genius." "That's fine, Tony." "Mr. Tony, what a sarcastic remark." After a half-hearted complaint, Tony added, "Did you mean to reject Alex?" Henry replied, "Of course. Didn't you see how that financial tycoon's eyes lit up when he saw I could take the blame? It's just that this was our first meeting, so some things were difficult to say. We've been acquainted for a few years now, and with Ms. Hepburn around to chime in, I can treat my rejection as a joke without being too rude. This is the best outcome for me. I don't even want to think about why a big shot like him would need someone like me." Tony thought back to the inside story Alex had shared. He knew so much. Could it really be, as he claimed that there was no connection? If you're worried about him, you could have made more modest offers and not revealed your abilities, Tony criticized. Henry scoffed. If I had just acted like an ordinary person, with your resources, would it have been difficult to find someone more capable and trustworthy than me? Do I really have any other leverage? Oh, sorry, I forgot. After all, the Stark young master lives a simple life. I can't understand how difficult it would be for a nobody like me to cross the social ladder and enter your circle, even as a servant, if I don't demonstrate some unique abilities. How can you possibly look upon a stranger like me? I'm not so naive as to think that just a few conversations, especially those that weren't always pleasant, could be considered friends. If we were truly friends, I'm sure you would have been more forthright when Katharine Hepburn asked for my opinion just now. And you wouldn't have used Ms. Hepburn as bait to lure me into a humiliating situation, but I'm not offended by this. Whether or not you enjoyed today's monkey show, young master, I did my best. All of this is to repay you for giving me this opportunity. For this, I am truly grateful, and I mean no disrespect. After all, opportunities like this don't come to everyone. This is by no means a sarcastic remark, or an attempt at sarcasm. And I believe that our future paths won't overlap much. I'm not the son of a billionaire, and our circles wouldn't be the same. The car arrived at its destination and parked on the side of the road. Henry consciously opened the door and got out. Standing beside the car, he gave a Western-style wave and bow, a standard business smile, and said, "So, goodbye, never see you again, Mr. Tony Stark." Tony Stark's silence was the best response. Chapter 90 Airport Pickup. Arriving at the Stark mansion again, Henry drove up in a 1965 Cadillac DeVille III. He stood by the passenger seat, holding a red rose, and welcomed Katharine Hepburn aboard. The 84-year-old woman was dressed in a violet gown, a wide-brimmed silk sunhat, and long white gloves. Her style was retro, yet she exuded elegance. Henry presented her with flowers and complimented her. "Katharine, you look absolutely stunning today, you're so sweet." "But I only have one flower today," Katharine teased, catching sight of the bouquet in the back seat. "One gorgeous red rose will do." Henry then opened the passenger door and gestured, "Please." Katharine tapped Henry on the head with a red rose and said, "You're such a quick thinker. I wonder if I were 60 years younger, I'd fall for your advice." "It's my honor." Katharine slid into the passenger seat, tapping the leather cushion above the glove compartment. "Drive quickly. Today's the day for you, a fan, to meet a star. You don't want to miss the airport pickup and leave our star waiting in vain, do you?" "Don't worry, the plane arrives at 10 in the morning, right? We still have plenty of time." "Katharine, have you had breakfast?" "Yes. Old people don't have the same irregular mealtimes as you young people." Henry drove and chatted all the way until they soon arrived at Los Angeles International Airport. After parking the car and arriving at the departure hall, Katharine and Henry, waiting for someone, played a game of guessing who the paparazzi was. After all, this was the airport closest to Hollywood, and tabloids and paparazzi were always waiting to see which celebrities would arrive. Katharine's arrival didn't attract the attention of the young reporters and paparazzi. Their targets were still the popular or highly talked about celebrities. Naturally, they didn't notice that they had gone from being the observer to being the observed. Soon, a beautiful elderly woman emerged from the departure hall. She wore a red dot ivory t-shirt, a peach pleated skirt, a white silk headscarf, and large sunglasses. She carried two large, modern-looking Louis Vuitton handbags, one large and one small. She wore a pair of pale pink low-heeled shoes, and her striking elegance captivated most of the airport's attention. Just as the young people couldn't immediately recognize Katharine, no one could identify the slender, elderly beauty. Only Katharine greeted her with a big hug. "Audrey, long time no see." "Katharine, you look so well." The other Hepburn woman responded with a warm embrace, exchanging greetings with her close friend. Henry, seemingly frozen in fear, finally awoke after a nudge from Katharine, offering the flowers he held in his hand and greeting him warmly. "Ms. Hepburn, welcome. I'm a huge fan. Meeting you in person is truly..." Henry, unable to form a complete sentence, tears welling up in his eyes, overwhelmed with emotion, unable to describe his feelings. It must be said that even when he met Tony Stark, Henry felt he was just seeing a kid. Not the kind of person who would become a hero, a great figure. But Audrey Hepburn, now a faded beauty, even with her fading glow and wrinkles unseen by scarves and sunglasses, felt a surge of excitement unimaginable to those who haven't truly adored a celebrity. Perhaps the 20 years of emptiness and torment since crossing into this world, the more than a month of immersion in movie channels in Alaska, had made Henry more reliant on these memories than he had imagined. The memories before his time travel were too distant and too chaotic. The beauties of Hollywood's golden age were like the breaking light of dawn, truly breaking the gloom that had initially enveloped the world. So, beyond the feeling of meeting the stars I admired, this feeling was more of a sense of salvation. Being rescued by old John in Alaska was a physical redemption. But seeing Audrey Hepburn in person was a spiritual salvation. "Thank you, these flowers are so beautiful," Audrey Hepburn said, accepting the flowers. "You must be Mr. Brown, right?" "Yes, Henry Brown. You can just call me Henry," Henry replied, emotionally struggling to utter a coherent sentence. Perhaps Henry's attitude was too intense, and Catherine was afraid he might actually scare her. She lightened the mood with a joking tone, saying, "Audrey, do you know what he said when he first saw me?" "Oh, did he say he was a big fan of yours?" "No, he said, 'Oh, it's this Miss Hepburn.' He looked so disappointed, I almost felt like I needed to fix his nose." Audrey was stunned for a moment, then chuckled. "Did he really say that?" "Yeah, can you imagine his expression?" "I think I can," Audrey said with a smile. "Remember Givenchy? Hubert de Givenchy. When I first visited him, he also mistook me for another Miss Hepburn and was disappointed. Then, are we even?" Catherine said. Audrey hooked her arm around Catherine's and smiled. Is there even a way to be even in this kind of thing? The public conversation between the two close friends, regardless of age, also attracted the attention of others. Perhaps a meeting between two elderly women wasn't a big deal, but when one was called Catherine and the other Audrey, also known as Ms. Hepburn, it certainly made for some interesting conversation. Both were once celebrities accustomed to dealing with the media, so they were quite perceptive of paparazzi's movements. Catherine spoke first. "Let's get the car first. You must be a little tired from flying all the way from Switzerland." "Not bad, I got a good rest on the plane. It's just the jet lag, I'm still not adjusting that quickly," Catherine said to Henry, who stood there blankly. "Child, helping your celebrity with her luggage? You have no sense of responsibility at all. I doubt you can do your job." "Ah, yes." Henry quickly took Audrey's handbag and said, "Mom, please let me help you." "Thank you, handsome boy." The two elderly sisters, arms linked, chatted endlessly about their lives. Henry dropped them off at the waiting area and drove off to the parking lot. He also knew that the interview for the role of Audrey Hepburn's driver had already begun, but he didn't know whether the first impression he made on the other party was good or bad. Chapter 91 Job Offer. "Robert isn't coming with you?" Catherine asked. Since her divorce from André Dottie in 1982, Robert Wolders, a Dutch actor 7 years her junior, had become her certified life partner. However, they never married, remaining more than friends. Audrey Hepburn would bring her young boyfriend to many public events. The two even met with then-President Ronald Reagan together. In contrast, Catherine has been single since her divorce in 1934 and has no children. But that doesn't mean she doesn't care about her friend's love life, so she asked. Audrey said helplessly, "Robert isn't very interested in the charity trip to Africa, so he didn't really want to come this time. I didn't want to force him." "Huh? Men. They're all enthusiastic about going to bars and restaurants, but asking for their company is like asking for their lives," Catherine slammed. Henry, sitting in the driver's seat, said helplessly to the two people in the back seat, "Hello, ladies, I'm driving very well. I don't deserve such criticism. I'm injured." "Oh, good boy, drive well. And no matter what you hear, just ignore it. Will that make you feel better?" Catherine's sharp words continued, making Henry very depressed. Audrey, however, intervened, saying, "Henry, how long have you been driving?" "You drive very smoothly," Henry replied honestly. "I've had my license for about 6 months. Before that, I was driving in places like Alaska, where it's a no-man's land. I'm considered a natural driver." All three sentences were true, though many of the circumstances were left out, which was enough to inspire others to imagine. Moreover, the quality of a driver's driving is best understood through actual experience, and driving experience is only a reference. Both Audrey and Catherine had experienced the experience of experienced drivers with poor driving skills. Some drivers, like those who can't control the accelerator, can't maintain a steady speed. They press and release the pedals, causing the speed to fluctuate like a wave. Even driving in a straight line would make one feel carsick. Catherine chimed in, "Little Henry's a pretty good driver. At least he didn't make an old woman like me vomit my breakfast while driving this old car." Henry, looking innocent, said, "Catherine, I asked you if you wanted me to rent a car." "Oh, don't worry, kid, no one's going to mind your old car." The third-generation DeVille, a 1965 model, was considered a large luxury car by Cadillac standards. While not as classy as Bentleys or Rolls-Royces, it was still quite impressive for some Hollywood starlets back then. These two aging beauties had seen it all. At their age, they'd reached a point where they didn't have to worry about anything. Of course, they wouldn't be bothered by the car they drove. Safety and comfort were more important. Furthermore, since knowing he'd be driving this Cadillac for these two distinguished guests, Henry had thoroughly cleaned the interior, practically refurbishing it. Especially for those unnoticeable areas like odors and cracks, the Kryptonians had them fixed to their own standards. They barely even disassembled the entire car and given it a detailed maintenance. As for the car's performance, the previous owner had done a very good job and had no bad habits in his daily driving, so the car had no major issues. This was a major reason Henry had agreed to take it over. In other words, the only real flaw was the lackluster paint. Even with waxing, it still wasn't as good as new. But for two aging celebrities who considered themselves past their prime, this flaw was perfectly acceptable. At their age, they didn't want to relive the memories of playing hide-and-seek with paparazzi. "Oh, by the way," Audrey pulled a business card from her purse and handed it forward, asking, "Henry, do you know this address?" Henry took the card and took a moment to examine it. Ronnie Insurance Agents. While insurance agents sell insurance, they work from the perspective of the policyholder, not the insurance company, to create a suitable insurance plan for them. A broker may work with multiple insurance companies and isn't limited to promoting the products of just one. Because brokers work on behalf of policyholders, they often offer additional services to help policyholders meet certain insurance product requirements, maximizing safety and reducing premiums. Audrey Hepburn's description certainly aligns with this common sense. She said, "Ronnie told me that if I want to purchase insurance on this trip to Somalia, Africa, I need to bring a qualified security team. Ronnie has contacted a security team for me this time. One of my goals in coming to Los Angeles is to meet them. If the fit is right, we'll sign a contract." "A security team," Henry said, his voice slightly lost. Both of these elderly beauties were incredibly attentive, their ability to read people's expressions honed to perfection. Henry didn't need to say anything, they understood the young man's tone. Audrey chuckled, "Don't worry, Henry. From the moment I saw you, this job was yours. Unless you didn't want it, how could I possibly refuse such an opportunity?" Henry said excitedly with a beaming face. "It's the honor of my life to serve Ms. Hepburn." His attitude revealed his true nature as a bootlicker. He had liked enough of the things he hadn't done before crossing over. But it's not entirely true that Henry was unconscious. He just sang various rhymes in his mind, such as "Young people don't know how good their ants are, but only after they have tasted them can they appreciate the sweetness of soft rice." Audrey was not happy that Henry agreed out of hand. Instead, she said seriously, "But this job is not easy, little Henry. I'm not hiring a driver so much as a personal assistant. The most important thing about this job is that you'll travel around the world with me, even though most of the time we'll be in Europe." Anton, who originally followed me, has been working for me since I was still filming in Hollywood. But after I became a United Nations Goodwill Ambassador for Children in 1988, visiting and attending charity events everywhere, he became a little overwhelmed and chose to retire. That's why I need a new assistant. I have to make it clear to you that this is not a simple driving matter. It shouldn't be that difficult. But it is very complicated, and the most important thing is that you have to accompany an old woman like me everywhere. Are you willing to do that? Of course I am, Mom. I have some talent in languages and may be able to help a lot. Henry repeated this short sentence in French, Dutch and German respectively. Chapter 92 New job confirmed. I'm really surprised. Audrey expressed her surprise without hesitation. She turned to her older sister, Catherine. The surprise you said you'd give me, could this be it? Catherine was born and raised in the United States, so besides English, she only knew a little French, and she wasn't very fluent. Audrey, on the other hand, was British, born in Belgium, from a Dutch aristocratic family. She spoke several major European languages with a native eloquence. And the three languages Henry spoke were also official languages in Belgium. Catherine hadn't expected Henry to pull this tactic, but it didn't surprise her much. Little Tony's sharp tongue was still as sharp as ever, but he never once called him a fool, which spoke volumes. So Catherine shook her head and said, "That's not the surprise I was talking about. I recommended this kid as your driver because he has a talent." Audrey curiously glanced at the young man driving in the rearview mirror. Catherine continued, "Little Henry isn't afraid of bullets." "Not afraid of bullets?" Audrey paused, then asked, "Is he the kind of fearless I'm thinking of?" "It's probably the kind you're thinking of." Catherine even pointed her head, as if firing a gun. Then, looking at her right hand, shaped like a gun, she shook her head in disdain. Audrey Hepburn was truly taken aback. People with special talents weren't all that rare in this world. And for unknown reasons, this world was quite tolerant of mutants with special talents. So, Audrey Hepburn didn't feel disgusted or uncomfortable with his special talents. She was simply curious, so she asked, "Henry, if you had such a talent, I think you could find a better job." "I can't afford that kind of salary." "Yes, ladies," Henry said resignedly, "but think about it, what kind of person would be willing to pay a fortune to hire me to take a bullet? A good person? Mostly bad, I'm afraid." Audrey and Catherine figured this out at the same time. Their age already proved they weren't naive people raised in a greenhouse. They'd seen the dark side of society, but they weren't completely ignorant. Henry said bluntly, "I haven't considered making money with this talent. It doesn't even matter if I don't. Working for Ms. Hepburn is what matters to me. As for compensation, just treat me like an ordinary driver or assistant. I'd even be willing to pay for this job. So, Mom, how much do you think I should pay for the opportunity to serve you?" "Oh, Henry, are you serious? That's so thoughtful," Audrey asked, her heart in her hands. "Of course, the opportunity to serve a beautiful woman isn't something everyone gets. On the contrary, there are people everywhere who do so many evil things that people would want to shoot them. If I want to earn that kind of money, I'll have to feed my conscience to the dogs." "Yes, Audrey, take this good boy with you. Your health is worse than mine, 20 years your senior, and you love to travel so much. Without someone to properly care for you, how much time do you think we'll have left to spend together?" Catherine's timely assist prevented Audrey Hepburn from agonizing over why Henry, with his talent, didn't help more people, as Tony Stark had before her. Furthermore, all that traveling had taken a toll on Audrey's health. She had let go of the elderly man who had always been by her side. Besides, Anton couldn't handle the workload, and Audrey also felt he was struggling. So, she needed new blood to join the team to better support her charity work. Finally, Audrey Hepburn relented. "Well, Henry, you're welcome. I hope you won't find the salary I can offer a retired star unacceptable." "Of course not, Mom, call me Audrey." "It's getting on my nerves when you call Catherine by her first name and only Ms. Hepburn. Is it a natural skill for women to act coquettishly in a jealous tone?" Henry admitted that he couldn't stand it, and even the Kryptonians had to break their defenses. "Okay, Audrey," Henry said carefully while driving, "actually, I have a small wish." "Oh, please say it," Henry said. "In fact, it would be great if I could get an autographed photo of you. I've searched all over Hollywood, but I can't find any photos of the two of you in souvenir shops, not even in those auction houses." Catherine didn't change her sharp tongue, and said self-deprecatingly, "Who would want a photo of an outdated old woman? So it's normal that you can't find it, isn't it? Isn't it because the people who have the autographed photos of the two cherish them and collect them so they can't be seen on the market?" "Oh, my God, Catherine, what's the matter with this child?" Audrey asked, patting her elder sister's arm and soothing her heart. "Well, I have to admit, the person the Stark man introduced seems to be of the same character as those two father and son. They don't seem very reliable. Otherwise, you should choose a new assistant." "Hello, ladies, I don't say that to everyone," Henry said aggrievedly. "It really is a familiar smell." The two elder sisters, like a united front, looked at the man in the driver's seat with wary eyes. Then they laughed to themselves. Henry gave a look of embarrassment and quickly changed the subject, saying, "So, are we going to the insurance agent now?" "No, we're scheduled to meet them this afternoon. And now it's almost noon, maybe we should find a place to have lunch. Any recommendations?" "I flew all night and only had a cup of coffee and a piece of toast for breakfast. Now I'm starving," Audrey said. "Well, how about Italian food?" Henry suggested. "It's a family restaurant run by an Italian couple. I can't say whether the taste is authentic or not, because I haven't been to Italy. But it's really delicious." Or do you have a restaurant you want to go to? The two old sisters looked at each other. Audrey said with interest, no, let's go to this Italian restaurant. Let's evaluate whether the Italian cuisine here is authentic enough. Catherine said, yes, I'm tired of a lot of people treating me as an old man. They always say that this can't be eaten and that can't be eaten. Henry, who didn't think of this for a moment, looked embarrassed and wanted to regret it. But seeing that the two big stars were already discussing Italian food enthusiastically, he still sent them to Aunt Saria's restaurant. For the elderly, it is more important to maintain a happy mood than to abstain from food. Thanks to Levi, the pianist of destiny, where are you, Lord D, I am Yuan Fang, and book friend 20,240,813,869 ek for the reward. Chapter 93 Insurance Manager Company. Aunt Cesaria's Italian cuisine was indeed delicious enough to captivate two celebrities. Audrey happily conversed with them in Italian, chatting not only about the food but also about everything else. Henry acted as an interpreter, relaying the conversation to Catherine, who didn't understand Italian, and occasionally interjecting. By the end, even without Henry's translation, Catherine seemed to be able to participate in the Italian conversation between Cesaria and Audrey, smiling when appropriate and making the right expressions when appropriate. Henry's observations revealed that, in addition to the tacit understanding between women, the body language used in Italian was even easier to learn than the language itself. After watching her so much, Catherine figured it out and mastered it without a teacher. And of course, the usual post-meeting ritual was a photo with the owner and the celebrity. This was still the era of instant cameras, and most celebrities wouldn't refuse a photo. Because these cameras lacked film, altering or distorting the image later was extremely difficult. If a photo is improperly stored and destroyed, it will be lost forever, beyond redemption. This uniqueness makes Polaroid photographs even more precious. So, the two Hepburns each posed for a photo with their boss and his wife, each leaving a personal message. This kind of Polaroid romance is something young people in the digital age of the future will never be able to experience. After a delicious lunch, Henry drove the two women to downtown Los Angeles. Ronnie Insurance Managers was located on the upper floors of a commercial office building. However, not just anyone could walk in, press the elevator, and ride to any floor. The combined reception desk and security personnel in the ground floor lobby diligently kept unauthorized individuals at bay. Anyone outside the building who wished to enter had to make an appointment in advance. The arrival of Catherine and Audrey Hepburn was met by no impediments. Mr. Wales Ronnie was personally waiting in the lobby to greet the distinguished guests who had made appointments for the day. This was an elderly gentleman, no younger than Audrey Hepburn. His generous, sturdy figure and impeccable attire betrayed his status as an old-school, elite white-collar worker. Furthermore, the two men were old acquaintances, and upon meeting, they exchanged a kiss on the cheek. Mr. Ronnie, with a look that even Henry understood, greeted Audrey excitedly. Ms. Hepburn, it's an honor to serve you again, William. I've come uninvited. You won't turn me away, will you? Catherine was a step behind, but she also exchanged a kiss on the cheek with Mr. Ronnie. Wales Ronnie said, another Miss Hepburn. I can't welcome you both enough. How could I possibly turn you away? Who is this? The elderly gentleman noticed the young man following the two celebrities. Audrey introduced him. This is Henry, my newly hired assistant. Henry duly pulled a bottle of champagne tied with a red ribbon from a paper bag and handed it forward, saying, Good day, Mr. Ronnie. This is a gift from the two Hepburns. Oh, that's very thoughtful, Wales Ronnie said, accepting the champagne, which had been returned to its original bag. He then proceeded to point the way. Come, everyone, please follow me. The security team I'm about to introduce you to is waiting in my office, with Mr. Ronnie leading the way. The security guards in the lobby on the first floor couldn't block their way. They even politely pressed the elevator button for the group and held the door open until everyone was inside. As Americans dealing with high-end clients, no matter how slovenly their private lives, they inevitably had a comfortably furnished storefront to receive guests. It was into this reception hall that Ms. Hepburn and the others were ushered, where four muscular men were already waiting. Audrey Hepburn and Katharine Hepburn, though no longer in their prime, have remained on screen. Even though they no longer possess the dazzling beauty of their heyday, many still recognize their current appearances. The several large white men were well aware of their purpose for being there today, and knew who they might be hired to protect. So, the moment Audrey Hepburn appeared, they all rose to greet her. Even if it wasn't the employer herself, it was still gentlemanly etiquette for men to rise and greet a woman upon her entrance. Wales Ronnie took the lead, introducing Audrey. "Mom, this is my security team. The lead is Brian Mills, and the others are Sam Gilroy, Mark Casey, and Bernie Harris." Audrey shook hands with each person she introduced. They are retired Green Berets, Special Forces of the U.S. Army. Now they have set up their own security company, specializing in providing VIP protection services. Although it is a newly established company, I have tracked down their superiors in the Army, and each of them gave very good evaluations. Not only have they had the experience of being stationed overseas more than twice, they have also been honorably discharged without any dishonorable experience. If there is a disadvantage, it is that they do not accept long-term missions. But this fits perfectly with your visit to Somalia this time, Audrey. They will be responsible for your entry and exit security during your trip until you return to the civilized world. Audrey Hepburn asked doubtfully. "I just accepted the arrangement of the United Nations and went to visit the local children's aid facilities and make assessments and take photos to cooperate with fundraising activities. Is it necessary to make such a big fuss?" Brian Mills, who is in his prime, has shed his youthful innocence thanks to his military career. His sharp facial features, especially his determined and bright eyes, make him easily leave a deep impression on people at first sight. He stepped forward and said in a low voice that seemed to have its own echo effect, "Madam, we also hope that the world will be peaceful and safe. But the fact is not so, is it? The insurance company recommended us, and its intention is only to ensure your safety, that's all." "The team recommended by the insurance company?" Catherine said from the side. "Zaya Owie, I thought these guys were found by you," Wales Ronnie explained. "Catherine, I always ask insurance companies from the customer's point of view, and then choose the one that is most advantageous to the customer from the conditions offered by various insurance companies. Today it is Pacific Products. In addition to the extremely affordable premiums, they also proactively provide a security team to ensure that everything goes smoothly. This is why these strong young men are here. But their background and reputation, I personally investigated them. It's not like Pacific Products provided some information and I'm just reporting the same content to you. So they are indeed trustworthy, I can guarantee that." Chapter 94 Security Team. At this time, the United States had just concluded the First Persian Gulf War, coupled with the reunification of East and West Germany and the precarious collapse of the Red Empire to the north. Consequently, American soldiers of this era felt invincible and unstoppable. Even if a soldier hadn't necessarily participated in that war, using the same equipment would inevitably lead others to believe they could do the same. And this wasn't just an illusion, but a reality. Even after a soldier retired, the habits he'd acquired in the military wouldn't be quickly eroded by ordinary life. However, Brian and the others lacked that piercing aggression, they were reserved and composed. For these two experienced celebrities, this aura lent them an extra layer of trust. After all, those who acted calmly and composedly were always more trustworthy than those impulsive young men. The latter were far more likely to mess things up. However, Audrey, having taken her seat, didn't rush to fully trust anyone in the team. She pulled a document from her bag, placed it on the table, and pushed it forward. "This is the itinerary planned by UNICEF. Please see how you can collaborate within it, and if any changes to the itinerary are necessary. If so, please give me a brief overview." Every Audrey Hepburn had encountered so-called security teams, and they weren't necessarily the same young men before them. After all, during their heyday, everyone had bodyguards by their side. Even during film promotions, when they were traveling across the United States, the film crews were always accompanied by security personnel to prevent any unnecessary incidents. So, Audrey Hepburn presented the UNICEF itinerary as a test. Even if she didn't have the relevant knowledge, her long experience as a protector had honed her discerning eye. One could tell whether a person was good or bad by listening to their plans. If they were simply trying to suppress their opinions and simply stood by their protected person, their team wasn't much better. But Brian Mills was a very organized man. He flicked through the itinerary provided by the United Nations, explaining how his team members could coordinate and deploy each itinerary. He also pointed out the shortcomings in the original plan and what adjustments needed to be made. Each item was explained very clearly. At least to the layman present, it seemed that this man seemed very impressive and that everything he said must be true. Audrey certainly couldn't find any fault with Brian's explanations and corrections. She said, "Mr. Mills, Could you please organize what you just said into a plan? You should know that if we want to revise the itinerary proposed by UNICEF, we have to come up with a reasonable plan. Instead of arbitrarily changing the plan at the last minute and demanding others' cooperation, Brian Mills smiled unexpectedly shyly and said, I guess this means we got the job. Of course, you're welcome. Audrey stood up and shook Brian's hand. Brian continued, if we're going to make a plan, can I have a copy of this original itinerary for reference? Of course, it's not confidential, Audrey replied. Immediately, an assistant from her management company took the document and made a copy. Audrey said, I'm sorry, but we're a bit pressed for time, and there aren't many days left before departure. I might have to ask you to hurry up. We understand, Brian nodded. How can I contact you once our new plan is ready? Please give it to my new assistant, Henry Brown. Henry didn't take his seat with the 2 stars, but stood behind them. When Audrey introduced him, he nodded. Audrey, thinking for a moment, turned and asked, Henry, do you have a fax machine? I only have an answering machine. If you need a fax machine, you can apply for another phone line. In this era when the internet was just emerging and email boxes were still hatching in some corner, file transmission relied on fax machines or mail. Although this thing can be bought at any hardware and electrical appliance store, in order not to compete with a telephone line, you have to apply for another telephone line. This is not something that can be purchased immediately, and you have to wait for the telephone company to install it. So Audrey turned to her insurance manager and said, well, Wales, can I borrow your fax machine? Of course, Mom. Well, Mr. Mills, Brian Mills interrupted and said, Mom, just call me Brian, okay, Brian. Then you can call me Audrey too. If you want to fax a document, please fax it to Mr. Ronnie. If you want to arrange a time to negotiate, please contact Henry. Henry wrote a phone number by hand and handed it over. He said, sorry, I don't have a business card yet. The jump from a casual actor to a celebrity assistant was quite a big change, so Henry's surroundings hadn't been adjusted yet. Fortunately, Brian wasn't a stickler for rules. After he took the call, he asked, how many people will be accompanying the ladies' team? I need to confirm how many people I'm protecting, Audrey replied. They'll be UN personnel, accompanied by members of the peacekeeping force, so we don't have to worry. They'll mainly be responsible for the safety of me, my assistant, and Henry. Although there was no need to worry about the invulnerable young man, Audrey didn't choose to go so far as to spread the news. This was also Henry's private instruction. Such things really didn't need to be told everywhere. Besides, in her opinion, Henry was only invulnerable. If he was left behind during the operation, it would be a disaster. But Brian was looking at the other big star present. Catherine noticed his gaze, waved her hand and smiled. Come on, you don't think an old woman in her 80s would bother myself, do you? Leave the work of the Dark Continent to you young people. I'm here today just to join in the fun and see what you're made of. If you want to protect Audrey, you can't be a weakling. So, are we qualified, Ms. Hepburn? Brian asked. The quick-witted Catherine retorted, which Ms. Hepburn are you asking about? The 2 elderly sisters, who shared the same surname and were not related by blood, burst into laughter again. Only then could Brian Mills's youthful side be seen. He blushed and scratched his head sheepishly. However, his comrades didn't let him go and started to playfully fight. Fortunately, they remembered they were in front of a lady and on someone else's territory, so they didn't go too far. But they also yanked Brian's carefully combed hair, messing it up. This only made the 2 sisters even more amused. Chapter 95, African Trip. Don't expect star-rated hotels or central air conditioning in Africa. A single fan in the room is a welcome relief. Otherwise, you'll have to endure the pestilence of mosquitoes, windows wide open, hoping for a breeze. But even if a breeze does arrive, it's likely to be uncomfortably hot. Henry's treatment was no different from that of Audrey Hepburn, the star of this charity trip, a single room. The only difference between him and the other members of the delegation was that his room, as an assistant, was right next to his employer's, making communication and handling matters easier. However, Henry's sleepless nights weren't due to the African climate, they were simply compiling the materials for the trip. Don't assume that for a UN event like this, Audrey Hepburn could simply find a location and pose for a few photos. At each location, a record of the visit was required, with photos as supporting evidence. At the end of the trip, a report was submitted. Besides providing information on child protection agencies and education in Somalia, This report's more important purpose was to encourage generous donations to fundraising events. Originally, these records and reports were written by Audrey Hepburn herself, with photographs provided by the UNICEF record officer accompanying her. As her assistant, Henry naturally took over this responsibility, drafting the report, which Audrey Hepburn then revised. This undoubtedly significantly reduced Hepburn's workload. Such treatment was something Aten hadn't enjoyed before. Hepburn's original typewriter now sat in Henry's room, gathering dust. Yes, it was unused by Henry. Or rather, it wasn't used as often. This was primarily due to his presbyopia. Typewriters weren't like future computers, with their adjustable font size. So, Henry simply wrote the letters by hand. No cursive or swashes, just regular block letters, several sizes larger than the typewriters. This allowed Audrey to read her typed work without the strain of her presbyopia. Another reason for handwriting was that when Henry unleashed his super speed, he could write faster than on a typewriter. After all, the typewriter's mechanical arms take a fixed amount of time to pop out and reset. Kryptonians going full speed would just make the poor machine smoke and the arms fight each other. It was better to just write it by hand, just be careful not to puncture the paper. As for the content, it was even simpler. After looking at several drafts Audrey had submitted, Henry used the same template, tweaked the content, and it was ready. After all, this thing resembled an official document. If someone were to use flashbacks, interpolations, montages, and then add in some foreshadowing and suspense, who would be driving them crazy? Official documents should be like eight-legged essays, simple and clear. The moment you see a paragraph, you know the main point. It shouldn't make you guess, or have to read through it to understand the whole thing. This was nothing for Henry, who had experienced exam-oriented education before his time travel. He could easily come up with something without even needing to use his super brain for deep thinking. Audrey Hepburn wasn't a poor student, and even after her rise to fame, she actively pursued self-improvement. But compared to someone like Henry, who could secretly use cheating devices, her 60 years still often left her unable to cope. So, Ms. Hepburn quickly recognized the benefits of Henry becoming his assistant. At least she could get a good night's sleep every night, as long as she could tolerate the awful weather. Even for the photos for the visit, Audrey provided the camera, film, and developing materials and tools, leaving Henry to work. So, during the trip, in addition to personally assisting with daily tasks, the assistant could be seen running around, camera slung around his neck, snapping photos for the event. Developing photos at night was even simpler. With a black cloth blocking off a section of the room, Henry could develop the photos in darkness, eliminating the need for red lights. Then, during a break from the event the next day, he and Audrey would discuss the report and the selection of photos. This significantly reduced Audrey's time and energy spent on these trivial matters, easing her burden. Henry, who had never worked as an assistant in 2 lifetimes, had, with his vast knowledge and impressive memory, and the dedication cultivated from a previous life of working 996, managed to transform himself into a 007 talent. But he never felt tired. Although the master she followed was no longer in her prime, her bright eyes were even more intelligent than before, her voice remained unchanged from the movie, just as melodious. Not to mention her thoughtfulness and words filled with wisdom and brilliance. Before today, Henry had always thought that the term saintly was a personality trope, even a derogatory term with the opposite meaning. Those who claimed to be saintly were actually illogical, brimming with selfish motives and calculations. Once their own logic was used to attack their own statements, they were reduced to furious curses. But after meeting someone dedicated to public welfare, all those stereotypes were completely overturned. It turns out that such selfless dedication really does exist. However, it's undeniable that Audrey Hepburn was already well off, which allowed her to devote herself to these charitable causes. As the old saying goes, when poor, take care of yourself, when rich, benefit the world. Ms. Hepburn had clearly reached the second stage. While this woman genuinely cared for the children, she wept at the sight of their pity and smiled heartily at the innocent laughter of the children. The rest of the team was in a state of utter chaos. It's said that diplomats are like half spies, and public welfare activities disguised as charitable causes are often far more complicated than they appear. Henry won't comment on the UN entourage. Besides assisting Audrey Hepburn with her itinerary, they also had their own missions. Even the security team assigned by the insurance company to the actress, who was dedicated to public welfare, was not as simple as it seemed. The weapons that Audrey reluctantly agreed to carry were incredibly heavy. Light machine guns, grenades, and mines, equipment clearly not meant for security, caught Henry's eye. However, Henry couldn't explain what he saw with his X-ray eyes, nor did he want to expose the other party. Because Audrey Hepburn's star halo had become a shield for them, if it was exposed, it was not certain who would be hurt. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 96: The Security Team with a Hidden Secret. Henry didn't believe Brian Mills and his security detail had any designs on the now faded actress. He rather believed they were using Audrey as a cover to carry out their own mission, much like the UN's diplomats, and when it comes to American agencies keen on stirring up trouble abroad, three names pop up immediately: the CIA. In short, the entire Somalia delegation, save for Henry himself and Audrey Hepburn, the innocent figurehead, harbored ulterior motives. The chaos was akin to a parade of demons and demons. Even on this night, when Henry was holed up in his room, writing his visit notes, his supervision and super hearing kept watch. Aside from Audrey Hepburn, who had gone to bed early in the next room, everyone else was busy. Some were contacting the locals, some were sending messages with radios, and some were maintaining and counting their weapons. Henry didn't consider himself so lucky. Audrey's previous activities hadn't been anything like this. He simply happened to stumble into this bustle. He was even more convinced that, in fact, every time Audrey Hepburn visited a particular place, there were similar hidden incidents. However, nothing ever came to light, and no one ever got into trouble. Each trip ended peacefully. From their perspective, maintaining the actress's persona and image was actually a good thing for them. Otherwise, if their protection was compromised and their actions exposed, they would no longer be able to use Audrey Hepburn as a cover to carry out their undercover activities. So, Henry had no intention of interfering with their activities. As long as his employer was safe, why not let her live in a fairy tale dream world, doing what she loved and wanted to do? But this time, Henry couldn't resist his curiosity. It could be said that these people were operating right under his nose, and not checking would seem like a betrayal. So, in his free time, Henry used his X-ray vision to examine the documents they carried. He even developed the ability to read the documents page by page with his X-ray vision, examining everything. The plot consisted of contacting various local warlords and plotting to overthrow the current president, Mohammed Syed Barry. The plot also detailed the strength of each warlord, including their military strength and mechanization. It's unclear whether this information will be passed on to the current president of Somalia, causing unrest in that African nation, or whether the CIA intends to use this information for other purposes, seeking greater gains. Regardless, the vulture-like American empire remains familiar. The existence of superheroes and otherworldly powers hasn't made the world more peaceful. Conspiracies still linger in corners invisible to ordinary people. Or perhaps, they've only intensified their ruthlessness. Just like the world Henry knew, everything, even medicine and virtual digital artifacts, can be transformed into a sharp blade to pierce the enemy. The more powerful, the more painful the blow. The difference lies in who those wielding the weapons consider the enemy. Henry didn't interfere in these matters. Ultimately, this was a country of black men, not his. This universe, with its mutants, Captain America, and Tony Stark, was also not his. During those 20 years of captivity, whether described as blank or tragic, Henry carefully avoided any trigger points. He knew full well that once something crossed that line, there was no turning back. If he turned evil, using his Kryptonian powers recklessly, the outcome would be either the destruction of the world or his own. Of course, there was also a third, much-loved outcome. He became so powerful that he could control everything, wielding the multiverse in his grasp. He could then control whoever he wanted to live and whoever he wanted to die. The reason he embarked on this irreversible path of no return was primarily because this world lacked an anchor, a haven for the soul to rest in. Or, more simply, a home. Without a place to rest, it was easy for someone to go down a path of despair, unwavering, even if the world collapsed. Even if he wanted to give up along the way, the karmic consequences of his first step would propel him forward, regardless of the abyss ahead. This kind of person is the most terrifying to the world, to human society, because he has no worries. Furthermore, His actions compel him to continue, because if he stops, the karmic consequences he created previously will inevitably come back upon him, most likely leading to his own demise. If watching the movie channel on the old TV and those classic black and white films in Alaska was a spiritual salvation for Henry, then serving the woman sleeping in the next room was no less than the first anchor in his life, anchoring him to the present. Henry didn't reveal his life's events since arriving in this world to anyone. Even so, some people were keenly aware of some of the clues and reacted accordingly. Audrey and Katharine Hepburn treated Henry like their most common name, child. Katharine had no children, but Audrey was a mother who had raised 2 children. Although no one emphasized this, Henry still felt he was being treated like a child. Especially the way Audrey Hepburn looked at Henry. It wasn't like looking at a man, nor a life partner, nor even simply at an assistant she'd hired. It was like looking at her 2 sons, no longer with her, at this boy who needed care, perhaps even protection. Henry certainly hadn't considered recognizing him as his mother, nor did he harbor any lustful thoughts about a 60-year-old, past its life beauty. But he had to admit, there was something special about having someone around to care for him. It was like having a place in this world that belonged to him, a place that someone still remembered him. Such a feeling, of course, was something he wouldn't allow anyone else to sully. For that woman, Henry even felt that the rules he'd set for himself weren't beyond breaking. He wouldn't go on a killing spree for that matter. As long as their actions didn't harm Audrey Hepburn, he'd turn a blind eye. After all, no matter how the world messed up, he, a Kryptonian from another time, wasn't responsible. Henry had none of Superman's noble spirit, shouldering the entire planet. Looking out the window, the occasional barking of dogs broke the silence of the night. As this was the first time Henry had set foot on the African continent in 2 lifetimes, he didn't feel anything special. The night was still the same night. Whether it was the hot wind or the annoying mosquitoes, they were not a big problem for Henry, who had a Kryptonian physique. Not only was he immune to the cold and heat, but mosquitoes couldn't even bite through Kryptonian skin. However, the conspiracy lurking in the darkness would not stop because of the existence of Kryptonians. Henry would just watch coldly. Unless these conspiracies turned into huge waves and hide him or the lady. Chapter 97 Changes in Visit Plan. Hey, buddy, want a beer? Henry asked Bernie, the oldest member of the security team, while pressing a styrofoam travel collar in the trunk. The retired Green Beret-Co glanced at his comrade, Mark, and nodded. Henry, have one. Henry pulled 2 aluminum cans of beer from the ice-filled collar and tossed them over. He then grabbed one for himself. The 3 of them opened their cans simultaneously, took a sip, and exhaled simultaneously. The refreshing beer seemed to have a magical power, dispelling the heat from the African continent. Not far away, Audrey Hepburn, accompanied by UN personnel and local Somali officials, played with children from a child protection agency. However, only Ms. Hepburn showed genuine concern for the children. After taking their photos, the UN and Somali officials stood aside to discuss a matter they were concerned about, which Henry overheard using a super hearing. Everyone else could only see the worried expressions on the faces of the 2 groups. The only way to get them to smile, or to treat the children kindly, was to put a camera in front of them. It would be more effective than anyone shouting at them. Henry had just finished shooting a roll of film. He took the opportunity to return to the car to change film and drink a beer with the 2 privately hired security guards guarding the vehicle to beat the heat. He noticed the local guides and several black men in uniform, who looked like soldiers or police, also looking at them with envy. Henry pulled a full bottle of cold beer from his cooler and walked over. In his newly learned Somali, Henry said, "Hey, friends, it's a scorching day. How about a gift from a good friend? You're very generous, friend," the black men said, beaming as they took the beer. Henry, who had brushed up on his Somali before leaving, spoke haltingly. He could only speak the language he'd learned from textbooks, which was different from the local spoken language. At first, Henry was roundly mocked when he spoke to the black men, using the rigid, textbook-style Somali. His ability to communicate well now was a testament to his interactions with them. Given Henry's abilities, speaking like a local, even using the distinctive tongue-twisting accent perfectly, wouldn't have been a problem. But his learning rate was alarming, so he put on another show. After a few words with the black men, Henry returned to the car and asked old Bernie, "Where are Brian and the others?" Hearing Henry's question, old Bernie replied, "They're getting ready for tomorrow." Henry couldn't help but grumble, "Yet, we were told before we left not to change our plans. But we had to deal with something like this. No one knew the situation in Somalia had gotten so bad, old Bernie said with a wry smile. We thought this was just a simple job, just a stroll around and then back home. Henry refused to believe the complaint. If it weren't for these CIA people fanning the flames, would this African country have become so bad? But Henry certainly couldn't say that. He followed what old Boney said and said, we heard that we would come to visit, and it was Somalia that took the initiative to invite us. After we got here, we found out that there was social unrest, but there was no report in the country. I have a feeling that when President Barry said this, he was not actually asking for more UNICEF aid, but hoped that the peacekeeping forces would come to help him maintain order. Old Boney agreed. You are right, we have long been clear about the cunning of those Nigerians. No wonder those farmers used to only use whips to teach the Nigerians to do things instead of discussing things with them properly. Faced with such discriminatory remarks, Henry shrugged indifferently, far from accusing them of anything. After all, this wasn't the PC era yet, and these white people's opinions hadn't been completely suppressed. Even in the future, such opinions would merely be suppressed, not eliminated. To some spectators, it was like putting a lid on a pressure cooker, slowly heating it, waiting for the moment the lid couldn't withstand the pressure and popped off. But for now, Henry simply complained matter-of-factly, the location we're supposed to visit is already in chaos. Somali officials are insisting we go, even saying it's okay if Ms. Hepburn doesn't go, but the peacekeeping forces must. I almost laughed when I heard that request. Does that president who talks with such a nose in his mouth think we're his own soldiers, to be ordered around at will? PFFT, looking with a nose in his mouth, that's a funny way to describe it. That guy didn't raise his head that high, it's just that his nostrils are a little big. Old Bernie laughed. Yes, thanks to him, we were able to temporarily change our itinerary and split up to conduct the visit, Henry said helplessly. Actually, I was more interested in convincing Ms. Hepburn to abandon her upcoming trip and return home early. No one can persuade that famous star, right? Old Boney said with a relaxed tone. Look, even Brian has quietly accepted the change of plans and is making subsequent arrangements, Henry said quietly. You know, that's how it works in movies. Once a team is separated for various reasons, one of the teams always suffers, or even gets wiped out. Otherwise, there's no cinematic effect. Ha, Hollywood people, Old Boney laughed. You say it's a movie effect, but it's not always like that in real life. Otherwise, in wartime, what commander would dare to split his troops into two to attack? Besides, the place we're going to tomorrow was selected from the alternative locations in the original itinerary. Brian already had a plan, he just needs to adjust the deployment and confirm the new location. With us here, don't worry about your safety, Henry muttered a few words, just like an ordinary young man who is afraid of death. Not far away, Ms. Hepburn waved to Henry, and the assistant immediately understood and picked up a box of candies and biscuits in the back of the car. Henry said to the person next to him, the lady is calling me, I'll go first. Go ahead, kid. I'll take care of your ass. Old Bernie said something with a hint of disagreement, and then he and his old comrades around him burst into laughter. Henry didn't hate these old soldiers who concealed their CIA identities. He guessed in his heart that they probably wouldn't be able to stay there for too long. The intelligence unit is a stinking shit pit, which is incompatible with the attributes of a soldier. But he didn't forget to fight back. Then it's best for you to stop someone with a big baby rushing towards my ass with your mouth. That way you don't have to worry about the problem of your own ass. Wow. Good job, kid, Mark, who had been silent all the time, praised. Chapter 98 New Places to Visit. I can't believe this is real, Henry said as he sat in a small jet, gazing out the window at the blue sky and white clouds. While this rented jet wasn't a luxurious Gulfstream, it was still far more comfortable than a traditional propeller plane. Brian, settling comfortably into his seat, said, You should be thankful the airport we're heading to has a proper concrete runway. Otherwise, we'd have to take a traditional propeller plane, and the turbulence alone would have made it feel like a roller coaster. Henry looked speechlessly at Brian Mills, the head of the security team, and said, Do you think I'm a child who screamed with excitement when I got on a plane? What I find incredible is that the UNICEF personnel acted like puppets of Somalia's current president, Mohammed Siad Barre. They said the itinerary couldn't be changed, and they went along just fine. They even went with the same peacekeeping squad. To me, the symbolism of this is greater than their actual combat capability. Of course, I'm not saying the peacekeeping troops are all worthless, but they were too few in number. If trouble really arose, they wouldn't be of much use. At best, they could help the UN personnel escape. And the president seems to expect us to come down like a celestial force and quell the unrest in Somalia. He might as well be carrying a Quran and preaching it everywhere. What Henry didn't say was, maybe the reason Somalia is in such chaos is because this group visiting the children's facility has become the biggest troublemaker. There were 8 people on the plane: Audrey Hepburn, Henry's assistant, 4 members of the security team he had met at the insurance agency, and a female flight attendant. The captain was in the cockpit. It was precisely because of this minimalist crew that Brian had rented a small jet. The UN would cover the cost. The rental car had already been arranged at the destination airport, and local officials and guides were waiting. After a moment, Henry asked again, "I just can't understand. Who decided where we're going?" Seeing the young man acting timid and fearful, Audrey almost believed he was truly that scared, if she hadn't known he was bulletproof. But Audrey didn't expose his fear. Instead, she patiently explained, it was a collective decision. Everyone agreed that southern Somalia, where we're going, is farthest from the unrest in the north. This nonsensical reasoning almost made Henry laugh. But then he thought again, it wasn't surprising that those with the final say made such a choice. Strictly speaking, the world hasn't yet experienced the Arab Spring. They simply believe that if the source of unrest is contained and prevented from growing, the problem can be solved. And that the American military is invincible. The problem is that when the entire Somali society is permeated by the same atmosphere, unrest in one place could easily trigger a widespread response, leading to similar unrest elsewhere. Therefore, the requirement of farthest from the unrest is no longer a guarantee of safety. But no one realized this, and some even foolishly refused to believe it, simply trusting that the American soldiers were truly invincible. Henry had no decision-making power, not even the right to make suggestions. He could only privately advise Ms. Audrey Hepburn, or else mutter a few words. But as long as Ms. Hepburn disagreed, Henry, as an employee, could only act according to his employer's wishes without further evidence. Soon, the plane began to descend. Passing through a patch of white clouds, the view outside the window returned to the African savanna. This area was an extension of the Kenyan savanna, so looking down from the plane, one could see large herds of wild animals roaming the land. Henry's supervision allowed him to see that it was a herd of zebras. He couldn't help but sigh. "Is this the kind of place we'd visit?" Brian explained. "Our target is a small settlement about a half-day's drive from the airport. There's a child protection agency there, supported by UNICEF." Old Bernie added, "Nominally, it's to provide local care for homeless children, but in reality, no one knows how the funds are being used." His comment was somewhat cynical, earning a glare from Brian. Ms. Hepburn wasn't particularly pleased to hear such remarks. "So," Old Bernie added, "but this child protection agency is quite well maintained, which is why it was included in the planned visit list and ultimately became a potential candidate." As everyone chatted, the small passenger plane landed smoothly. The Italian pilot demonstrated excellent flying skills, causing no discomfort to the passengers. Because it was a small airport, while staffed, it was well ventilated. Animals were occasionally seen crossing the runway. The apron was just in front of the hangar, requiring the pilot to maneuver the aircraft there. After communicating with the tower, the Italian captain parked the plane at a designated location. 2 unattended Range Rovers were already parked nearby. Brian and his 4 companions were the first to disembark, forming a semicircle in front of the cabin door, keeping a close eye on the situation. Henry followed suit, but didn't stay away. Instead, he supported Ms. Hepburn, who was exiting the plane shortly after. Henry spotted the Range Rover nearby and asked, "Is that our transportation?" Sam and Mark each approached to inspect a vehicle. Brian said, "I did some research beforehand. Where we're going, even half-decent roads are scarce. We'll mostly have to travel across grasslands. For driving in this kind of place, an off-road vehicle would be the best choice. But the comfort is like something a dog has chewed on. There's no point in getting it right. If you want both comfort and convenience, these SUVs are the way to go. Sports utility vehicles, or SUVs for short. The Jeep Cherokee and the Land Rover Range Rover are considered the forefathers. In Africa, expecting to find the latest SUVs like the Ford Explorer is sheer folly. Brian's acquisition of 2 Land Rovers was already a feat of genius. He couldn't ask for more. Henry speculated that this might be CIA resources. While it was certainly taking advantage, it certainly didn't need to be pointed out. Brian also asked Audrey, "Mom, I'm sorry to bother you with this car for the next 2 days, it's not a big deal. I've ridden in SUVs before, and a Land Rover is much more approachable." Chapter 99 New Arrangement. Henry moved a chair so Audrey could sit in the shade under the hangar. He said, "Boss, we need to load the supplies from the plane into the trucks. It'll take a while, so please rest here." Audrey complained, "I've been on the plane for a while. Now I'm finally off, and you're asking me to sit down again. Go ahead, kid. I'll walk around and stretch my legs. I'll sit down when I get tired, okay, boss? Just don't go out of our sight," Henry compromised. The men rolled up their sleeves and prepared to load the supplies from the plane into the 2 trucks. Unlike large airliners, small passenger planes have dedicated cargo holds. Instead, they have a dedicated luggage compartment for larger items. However, this time, they had a lot of stuff, so some of it was secured to the floor with straps. Brian directed, "Henry, move those boxes, okay?" Besides Henry, who agreed, old Bernie also helped move the boxes. They contained aid collected for donations to conservation organizations. The supplies were primarily clothing and food, along with some less practical stuffed toys. Other items included food, water, and sleeping bags. Brian and the other 2 carried larger wooden boxes and smaller iron boxes. These were logistical supplies for the security team, including firearms and ammunition. For safety reasons, Brian and his team handled these items personally, leaving Henry alone. However, they usually only carried pistols concealed, never carrying long guns. This was primarily to avoid scaring children. In Africa, firearms are commonplace. Even children who end up in child protection agencies might be survivors of family members who have been murdered. To avoid irritating these children, Ms. Hepburn requested that long guns not be carried around. After loading all the supplies into the car, Henry watched the Italian pilot park the plane under the hangar. Airport officials came over to take a look, collected the fee, and then went about their business. Henry and his team, fully prepared, did not leave the airport. Instead, they stayed on the tarmac, waiting for local officials and guides to arrive and lead the way. Otherwise, even if a group knew their destination, they might just charge straight in. Local conservation officials wouldn't necessarily recognize a group of white people, and a dispute would be disastrous. So, Henry used this time to inquire about the next steps. Brian explained, because the airport's facilities are rudimentary and lack nighttime takeoff and landing capabilities, even if we rush back to the airport as quickly as possible after reaching the site we're visiting, it will inevitably be dark and closed, so we'll definitely have to spend the day here. As for where to sleep, it depends on what the local officials decide. I've packed some camping gear, as a last resort. Where's the captain and the flight attendants? I don't think they're leaving, Henry asked. Brian replied, they'll stay at the airport to inspect and clean the aircraft. More importantly, in this desolate place, even finding a bar for a night out would be difficult. The local hotels may not be as comfortable and hygienic as the ones on the plane. If you need to wash, you can use the facilities at the airport, but it's just a matter of paying. Also, staying on the plane can prevent the African people from getting too enthusiastic. Everyone comes to take away parts, and in the end, only a skeleton of the plane is left, Henry said in surprise. Will this happen? Smiling and pointing to the surroundings, Brian said, look, there are no walls or barbed wire around. Anyone can enter the airport. Look under the hangar. As long as there is a plane, there must be someone next to it. After explaining the two clues, Brian spread his hands and smiled, and said, this is Africa. Whatever happens is not surprising. That's why I insisted on carrying a gun. I cannot use it, but I can't want to use it and not be able to use it. The last sentence was said to Ms. Hepburn. Because before setting off, when Audrey heard the request of Brian's team to bring weapons, she was a little disapproving. She thought that the purpose of this trip was just to see some children. Why should they bring weapons? But when she saw the UN personnel directly bringing armed peacekeeping forces, Audrey compromised. She only asked Brian and others not to hold guns in front of the children. After waiting for a long time, the local officials finally arrived. Two old black men, one fat and one thin. The fat one was wearing a t-shirt and suit pants made of linen. This kind of fabric is very cool and ventilated, and it can be regarded as a high-quality clothing fabric. The thin one, on the other hand, was a well-built tendon, a camouflage short-sleeved shirt and jeans. If he was equipped with a machine gun and a bullet belt, He would have a sense of oppression from a gangster without shouting robbery. The two chattered for a while, and their speech speed was so fast that it sounded almost the same as a quarrel. Then the fat one stepped forward to say hello and said in poor English, "Is this the UN ambassador, Ms. Hepburn and her party? I am your liaison officer, and the person behind you is your guide." Audrey Hepburn stepped forward to shake hands with the other party. Seeing this scene, Henry certainly did not forget to take out his camera to take pictures. It is said that officials like this kind of photos that can prove their political achievements, but Henry noticed that this fat black man was a little evasive when facing the camera lens. There was no sense of calmness at all. After taking the photos in a hurry, the fat black man said, "Everyone, let's get on the road. It will take us a long time to drive to our destination." Everyone got into the car without objection. Fat Old Black sat in the Jeep driven by the guide. Henry drove one car, with Old Bernie sitting on the passenger seat, and Ms. Hepburn and Brian, who was responsible for protecting him, in the back seat. Mark and Sam were in the other car, sitting in the driver's seat and the passenger seat respectively. In the back seat were piled up with accompanying supplies that could not be accommodated in the compartments of the two cars. Without saying anything, the group drove the car out of the airport and rushed towards their destination. It was not a problem for Mark's driving skills to keep up with the wild Jeep. What worried Brian more was Henry's driving skills. But after observing for a while, he found that Henry could follow the Jeep closely at a distance of 3 cars, and almost on the same ruts. This is a very important thing when following a car on an informal road. Obviously, Henry's driving skills are also impeccable, at least for the time being it seems to be sufficient. But what makes Brian a little worried is that Henry can speak Somali, and his behavior in the past few days also shows that he is happy to deal with these black people. But why didn't he come over this time? Even when he opened his mouth to talk, he didn't show any signs that he could speak Somali. Maybe other people think that Henry is embarrassed to talk to others in his poor Somali. But Brian feels that this is not the case. And his intuition has always been accurate, especially in the bad aspects. Day 2, celebrating the launch. There will be an additional update at 9 p.m. Chapter 100 Child Protection Agency. Brian didn't directly ask his question in the car. He'd noticed that Ms. Hepburn's assistant had been intentionally or unintentionally trying to keep some inappropriate and troublesome matters away from her. Asking about it at this point, without further evidence, would only cause her unnecessary worry. Brian trusted this intelligent young man to know his limits. He wouldn't hide things from him when necessary. It wasn't blind trust. Rather, Brian had observed the young man's exceptional thoughtfulness and his ability to strike the perfect balance between action and words, so he waited for him to initiate the conversation. So, the head of the security team simply stared out the window, keeping an eye out for any unusual convoys approaching them and periodically contacting the people behind them via walkie-talkie to ensure everything was normal. Henry, making use of his talkative nature, got Old Bernie to talk about his military experiences. Even if some missions were classified and couldn't be discussed freely, a soldier's experiences would inevitably become a lifelong conversation. Old Bernie had worn the Green Berets longer than the other 3, and he had an endless supply of anecdotes, both funny and embarrassing, from his training and his experience training new recruits. Henry played the clueless young man perfectly, and nothing Old Bernie said failed to surprise him. His manly jokes successfully elicited laughter from the star on board, prompting repeated questions. With 2 people cheering him on, Old Bernie's story became even more animated. He even readily revealed a series of embarrassing incidents involving Mark and Sam, 2 men not on board, during their enlistment. Using a toothbrush to clean the toilet during cleaning duty and then brushing teeth again at night was considered a minor incident. It wasn't uncommon to see foolish people at midnight emergency assemblies, with steel cups on their heads and helmets in hand, or men in tracksuits carrying chairs, or even those in camouflage uniforms carrying wash basins. Brian's mouth twitched as he listened, wondering if Old Bernie had some dirt on him, too. Time passed amidst laughter and the beauty of the African savanna as the 3 vehicles finally arrived at their destination. This child protection facility was the largest facility on Somalia's southwestern border. It was the main structure of the settlement itself. It could be said that the facility came first, and then the crowds gathered around it. So, its sheer size was imaginable. But in terms of settlement size, it was at best the size of a village. Standing at the village entrance, one could see from one end to the other. The houses were stacked one on each side, leaving little room for a single path, and there was no logical organization. This terrain posed a dilemma for Brian. It was difficult to defend and prone to ambush. The only advantage was that if the enemy tried to enter from the outside, the wide field of vision made it easy to detect them. The 3 vehicles drove directly into the facility's main gate. While it might be called a gate, it was actually more like the cattle fences common on American ranches during the pioneer era, a wooden frame that opened and closed. With a little effort, a car could easily ram through without causing serious damage, effectively rendering it useless as a barrier. This observation brought Brian some comfort. After the car stopped and everyone got out, a large group of children lined up to greet them. They clapped and sang a welcome song in English. Some of the younger children, however, looked around, unsure of their place. Near the children stood several stocky black women. They were teachers and nannies, their smiles genuine. Seeing a large group of children without expressions of sadness or wariness of outsiders showed that they were well cared for. Audrey Hepburn, heartbroken, said, "Henry, look, these children are so adorable." The white Hollywood star then got out of the car and accepted a simple bouquet of wildflowers the children had gathered nearby. She then took the hand of a little black girl and approached the other children. Henry quickly grabbed his camera and followed them, snapping away. Brian noticed that the guide's car was parked farther away. Aside from the portly official who came to act as Ms. Hepburn's translator, the guide hadn't come over. Instead, he met up with the adult men who were supposed to be members of the conservation agency and spoke. Although their actions didn't appear threatening, Brian remained cautious. He and Sam were responsible for carrying the supplies to the Child Protection Agency. Old Bernie and Mark each guarded a separate vehicle. Seeing the supplies arrive, the elderly teachers beamed. Brian couldn't understand their words, but from their body language, he could tell they were directing the items to be moved. The elderly women didn't allow the UN personnel to move the supplies directly into the agency's warehouse. Instead, they placed them under the shade of a large tree. The supplies had to be counted, confirmed, and signed for before they could be stored. After all, this was a UN-backed operation, so the rules were quite strict. It was a shame he didn't get the chance to explore the facility. But in this scorching heat, saving a few steps seemed like a good thing. Even though the scene seemed peaceful, Brian felt a lingering sense of alarm. He noticed Audrey Hepburn being led by the children to the facility's small playground, in front of a rudimentary stage. The group of men, led by the muscular guide, also shifted positions, placing themselves within sight of the others. On previous visits elsewhere, these black men would always find a place to hide after their scheduled departure, as soon as they had nothing else to do. Regardless of what they were doing, they always had to go through the trouble of tracking everyone down before leaving. Sometimes, they couldn't even find everyone. Fortunately, these were locals. As soon as the UN delegation arrived and greeted the local officials, the group moved on. They didn't insist on finding all the black men before leaving. Were there any cases like today where some refused to leave? Yes, but that was usually due to local bosses who had been paid in advance to protect them. Their job was to maintain a strong presence within the group. The sensible ones would leave these wealthy white men alone. Henry was still taking pictures, but he wasn't just focusing on Ms. Hepburn. He was also taking distant shots of the Child Protection Agency, wandering around. Mr. Mills, Henry suddenly shouted, coming over. "Have you seen the bag where I put the film?" The man who spoke was holding his camera, rewinding the film he had already taken. Day 2, celebrating the release. There will be an additional update at 9 p.m. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.